Man with No Name, The Rise of the Anti-Hero, Seductive Older Women, a hot, sweaty, shirtless Paul Newman, intricately designed French set pieces, race relations being put into focus, the rise of European art house filmmaking, Sidney Poitier turning in an acting year for the ages, a man talking to animals for nearly 3 hours, the simple bare necessities, a bowl of spaghetti in the desert, out with the old and in with the new age in Hollywood. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 1967. The Friday night movie will not be seen tonight, for that we may bring to you the revised Oscars podcast of the 40th Academy Awards. I am your host, Andrew, and I welcome you back to the Revisionist Almanac, the show that gets into the time machine, takes a deep dive into past Academy Awards ceremonies, and determines what the voters that year got right, and more importantly, what they got wrong. And as Bob Hope said that year on the awards stage as host, this is a crucial time in the life of a podcaster where small grievances, petty dislikes, and envy are thrust aside for the opportunity for outright hatred. I have two terrific guests here with me, both of whom you'll recognize from the season already. They were on the 1942 episode together a few months ago. Please give a warm welcome to Dana and Tom Duncan, a father-son duo who are the creators and the hosts of the greatest movie of all time podcast. Dana, Tom, thank you so much for being back, guys.
You're very welcome. Although I have to imagine that this being my swan song on the show has people energized that I will not be back.
Well, for only so long. Well, you will be back next season, but there will be
Or
potentially,
will I?
I guess. I certainly hope so. I've got you bookmarked.
I enjoyed referring to this year's films as being antiques because it's the year my wife was born.
I'll let you die on that sword, Dana.
Thankfully, because she doesn't even listen to our show, there's no way she
There's
will
no
ever
chance.
hear this.
Yeah, Sunday she got senior discount on our movie tickets, and was she pissed?
Oh man! All right.
She's
Well,
definitely not Jewish.
as a reminder, this show looks back on past Academy Award ceremonies with the luxury of hindsight to determine what should have won the Oscar for Best Picture, Best Director, and the 4 acting categories. And before we start things off, I hope you'll take time to rate and review the channel on whatever podcast streaming platform you're listening on, as well as finding and following the show on every social media platform at the handle Rev Almanac. All right, gentlemen, 1967. For those that aren't familiar with that year, the Best Picture winner was In the Heat of the Night. And Tom, I'm sure there might be a few astute listeners right now wondering why we're going to be including the good, the bad, and the ugly in our consideration, even though most people attribute it as a 1966 film. So if you would do me the honors, would you care to elaborate a little bit on specifically how you noticed this and why we're including it tonight?
Well, I will wrap it into my overall dialogue of the year as a whole. Let's just say at a certain point in watching the roughly 15 films that I did, because that's frankly all I really had time for, I just wondered at a certain point, is there going to be like a really, truly great movie? But then listening to the audiobook that I did, which I would highly recommend, and I will have to grab the name here before the end of the show. I probably should have had that up already, but regardless, in listening to that audiobook, I thought about it for myself at a second because he mentioned the Dollars trilogy and being released in the United States. And so I wondered what the criteria might be for something to be eligible for the Oscars. So looking back through the archive of what eligibility requirements were for the Oscars in 1967, roughly your film had to come out in its country of origin from 1966 at Halloween. So November 1st of 1966 to Halloween of 1967. If your film was released in its country of origin between those dates, you were eligible. And as luck would have it, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, probably the most seminal film of this entire period, was released in Italy, its country of origin, in December of 1966. So it would have been eligible for the Oscars if Oscar voters weren't so worried about the violence in a Sergio Leone film. Now, I will say, that movie will come up quite a bit tonight. It is the film that I think survives the most of any of these films. And let's just say that I might have some interesting takes, not only on that, but in its relation to all of the other films here, which can be summed up with this was probably the worst and least enjoyable year of the 5 that I've covered for you so far. The 3 regular episodes that will be still included and the 1 Apocrypha, or soon to be Apocrypha. And I really did not enjoy my time with most of these films. I started with the easy breezy ones to try and work myself into this, and I regretted it massively by the time I got to the much heavier lifters. As people may know, I'm not a particular fan of Bonnie and Clyde. I'm not a particular fan of The Graduate. I think they're really dated. At the time, they were revolutionary and breakthrough, but at this point in time, one of them, which was kind of a comedy, really isn't funny anymore. And the other one, which was noted for its violence, is kind of tame by modern standards. Once you've seen like one Tarantino or De Palma film, it pretty much makes Bonnie and Clyde look like a piker. So with that being said, and also the fact that I think that multiple other Best Picture nominees this year, Doolittle excluded because I didn't even bother to watch that Drek, which at the time most people thought bought itself a nomination by hosting a luncheon with basically a free steak dinner and free champagne for whatever it's worth. But the other 2 movies that were up for Best Picture are pretty much the TV movie equivalent of Race Relations. So let's get into it.
Well, I am a couple things on Good, Bad, and the Ugly. I'm very glad that it's included tonight because it's needed. I'll say that right now. It's needed.
Yes.
It was something I'm glad I was able to use to fill some spots. I'm also very appreciative as a friend, Tom, that you warned me about it, because if you had initially dropped this on me right now, I'd be in some deep shit because I would not have been, I wouldn't have been prepared for that.
That's what I suggested he do, and then after he told me he already told you, and then he's like, "Ah, damn."
Yeah, he was
would've-
completely
would've-
right. I should have blindsided you with that one.
Yeah.
Hopefully
It
have
would've
some
made for
other
good content.
surprises in store for you, but let's just say there will be a particular sound effect that I will be playing whenever Andrew gets really Andrewy. Let's just save that for as we come up, but I think it will come up at least once, if not twice tonight.
Can you define really Andrewy? I don't know if I've ever heard that term.
Cinebro extra, like, we need to promote more international film. I mean, come on, man. This is 1967. Okay. And while an Italian Western is probably going to win most of the categories for me tonight, I'll just telegraph that now. Like, some of the shit that you tried to get me to watch was just awful.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll dig into it. Before we get into the categories, I do want to kind of talk about just the year as a whole. So Dana, let's go over to you really quickly. 1967, of all the movies you watched, how would you sort of define prep for this period? What was your overall takeaway from revisiting this in a short period of time?
It seemed to be kind of like, I would say, people venturing out onto thin ice. It was kind of like they wanted to change, or they wanted to try something fresh or new, and they weren't sure quite what to do. So they're trying different things, but they're kind of doing it by just kind of poking their feet out a little bit at a time out on there to see if the ice breaks. And so some of them were a little more adventuresome than others, some of them less so. And so some of them were really conventional. And as I mentioned before, the one film, and I either saw the entire film, I think I saw 16 full films and 4 others where I watched at least probably a third to a half of, just so I could see what the jobs were for the various acting. I did not bother with Dr. Dolittle. I saw it as a child. It deserves to be there, much like me in diapers. It needs to be left.
That'll happen again here very soon anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's fine. Yeah. But anyway, I did not bother because, in retrospect, and this is a good trivia question, Dr. Dolittle, Rex Harrison's behavior was so abysmal. He was at the same time filming this and going through a divorce. he was actually fired for a week and replaced by whom?
You're just going to steal one of my trivia questions. Okay, fine.
Oh, too bad.
I have no idea who stepped in.
Christopher Plummer.
Yep.
Oh, wow. I would have enjoyed
And
the
then
movie
he-
immensely if it was Plummer instead.
Yeah. I mean, this film
You mean
destroyed
somebody
his
with an actual
career.
vocal range?
After his shenanigans on this film, he the best he could do was a couple of Bollywood films and a TV movie. So
It did
I would
not
say
go well afterward, but
you guys are, wow, you were really harsh on that, Tom. I think this was, I watched 30 movies for prep for this particular year, and I think it was better than 42 in totality, just from my vantage point. But this phrase has been used in past episodes, sort of Hallmark movies, or movies that are very contrived or feel a certain way. There's a lot of Hallmarky type movies in 1967 that I'm not going to draw too much attention to right now. I'm sure they'll come up in various stages, but it was
I
a heavy
don't
mix of good
mind.
and bad.
I don't mind the hallmarkiness. Like, there's something endearing and comforting about something that's just so formulaic and structural. But, like, does it really excel? Not necessarily. But in this particular year, where I think you really could have probably gotten away with watching maybe 13 films and experienced most of the year, yeah, probably. So some of those will come up tonight, I would guess. Things that I think for the general population are probably the equivalent of TV movies. But I will say, this is the second time we both appeared, and the first time you mentioned 1942 a couple of times already. The historical context to the year that we're discussing, this is another one where I would say it's extraordinarily key. This is really the first year without the Hays Code. And so when you said you're dipping your toes in the water to try and figure out a new era of film, most people look at this as the precursor, the first year of true new Hollywood. And that Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate and some of these films kind of kicked off where we were headed, but that we weren't yet allowed to really like those films. The audience was ready for them, but that the studios were not. And so we have the old vestiges of Hollywood hanging on to award things to like Cool Hand Luke, which is a little bit more conventional, even though it's got some new Hollywood stuff in it. Or we're nominating and awarding Thoroughly Modern Millie for stuff. It's stuff that's old school musical. Dr. Dolittle getting supported by basically all of the guilds, as opposed to the primary drivers of the nominations. And for most people's money, stealing In Cold Blood's nomination that year, which I think, frankly, would have been a much better nomination. I think most people probably feel that way. But at the same time, you're at the end of a decade where race relations has been a key sticking point in the historical context. You have all the Vietnam protests. You're literally, the Oscars is happening while the year 1968 is like starting to roil. And all of this stuff is in a powder keg, kind of culminating in one of these moments, at least for the industry. And so I think the historical context is key to understanding what we're getting yet, even though I think most people would feel 68, 69, 70, 71 are much more important depth years comparative to this one.
This is ultimately a year where the generation gap rears its head.
It's the first real one where the baby boomers became the primary driver of dollars in the cinema box office for the first time, and they had to create basically an entire line of cinema for them. But I will also say it's the first time they recognized that black moviegoers were a thing, and they started to move in that direction. They were going to start the blaxploitation era as well. But with the violence we mentioned, if you like De Palma, you like Quentin Tarantino, you like basically anything with a large amount of violence, David Fincher, you have this year to thank for it.
And I would point out that the first film I watched for this year on the list was The Born Losers. And because when I was a kid, I always used to see they'd put these stupid films, the Billy Jack films, out. And this was the first one. And so I thought, I've never seen any of them, so I'm going to watch it. Oh, did I not enjoy that? Um, but it was a film that was basically independent producers, and they were trying to rival, and it made enough money that they made like, I don't know, 4 of them, 5 of them. And yeah,
Now,
not
Tom,
well, or the acting was abysmal, the directing was worse, and the cinematography was non-existent. It looked like somebody was using a handheld that had just picked it up at Kmart.
Tom, you might want to get the button ready because here's I guess maybe one of the points where I'm going to go in. Um, you may say I'm a certain way about international cinema or whatever the case may be, and that's true, that's valid. However, I do think that 67, you could tell that what was happening in Europe was definitely pushing cinematic boundaries in a way that I think America sort of was catching up to 3, 4, 5 years later. Like I think you can kind of see the big boom of 1967 with what was happening over in some of those European countries, France, Italy, etc. And I think this is the genesis point for a lot of stuff that happens from this point on.
The screenwriters of Bonnie and Clyde specifically were inspired by the French New Wave to create Bonnie and Clyde. So it's hard to deny its general influence overall, and the fact that once those films got introduced into theaters here and were outside of American control, those were generating a lot more audience buzz among a younger crowd to begin with, which kind of seeded the floor to cut the legs out from under the code and move towards a rating system. So yes, I wouldn't even say that's like really much of a hot take. It's just again more historical context for what this year actually was.
Well, it helped that Jack Valenti left the Johnson White House to take over the Motion Picture Association, and that was his first thing, was to come up with the letter codes and do away with the haze.
And if you want more historical context on this, I'll give you the audiobook that I know was suggested to Andrew by at least one listener, but I also listened to it and I really, really enjoyed it. It's about 15 years old, I think. So 2008, about 16 years old, actually. But Pictures at a Revolution by Mark Harris. If anybody wants to listen to that.
I have a
I have the
dreadful
book
ability.
itself.
I can't do audiobooks, but I'm trying for you guys for Barry Lyndon for an episode of GMOAT, but I have something with it's hard for me to pay attention to something that's just in an audio form only. I'm very much a visual stimulating person. So
I read the book. It was reviewed in the Sunday morning New York Times book review, and that's where I saw it. And then I proceeded to try and watch all 5 of the Best Picture nominees after I finished the book.
Save for Doolittle.
Yes.
all right, well let's talk Doolittle and other bad movies from that year because I'm gonna put the cart before the horse on this one. Doctor Doolittle was unequivocally the worst movie I watched for prep of the 30. You both saved yourself 3 hours or thereabouts of struggle with that one. Wow, that's one of the worst Best Picture nominees I think I've ever seen. Uh, there are some I haven't seen, but that one stands in a very rarefied air of terrible.
I was
Yeah.
not going to pay to rent to see that. Not even
Yeah.
for you.
My problem with Doolittle is it's way too long, yes, but it also like the first 65% of the movie isn't what I remembered it being or thought it was, and it's just sort of meandering and nothing happens, and then there's an intermission, which I was like, why is this movie so long that we need an intermission? And then the second like the final like 30% of the movie, it starts to kind of kick into some gear, but it's not good. It's not good at all. What about you guys? Worst movie for prep for you?
I will say just quickly for the audiobook, it does explain exactly what the thinking was behind making it so long. That was very intentional in the production of it and trying to get it to sell because it was kind of an event to have these long intermission musicals at the time. And that's where they had made their money like 2 years prior was in doing the same thing for Sound of Music and My Fair Lady, and they made a lot of money. The problem was is audiences stopped really caring about those right after the Sound of Music basically left, And so you had big catastrophes like this one and Camelot this year, and you'd end up having the following year as well with multiple others, even though Oliver ended up winning Best Picture in 68 or for 68 in 69.
Yep.
The end of the major musical roadshow pictures was basically done in by Doolittle winning here, or getting a nomination, I should say.
Well, there was
Now, as far as
significantly
the
less.
worst film
There
that
was so much less music than I was thinking there would be, and that's my problem with Doolittle. Is it's like not really a musical until that final 30%. It's just, yeah, it's not a good movie.
Well, it
You
helps
both
if
made
you
a
have
wise decision.
it helps if you have an actor who can sing.
That too. All right, Tom, what do
now,
you
as
got for
far as the
bad
worst
movies?
thing that I put on, it was going to be Weekend, which I watched the first 30 minutes of, and after like 4 different times where after like 5 or 10 minute segments, I just kept saying, what the fuck is this? I just turned it off and never went back to it.
You texted me at one interval from, you were like, I don't recall the exact wording of it, but something about like, are we watching another car crash? Is that all that's happening in this movie?
The sequence where she describes this really vivid dream of herself in this like sexually exploitative manner to her, I don't know, partner or whatever the fuck it is. And then it ends with, well, did this actually happen or was it a dream? I don't know. And then it just cuts to the next scene. And it's like, why is this in the film? Why, dear God? This makes no sense. There's no plot to this. It's just an amalgamation of like weird documentary flashes. It makes no sense.
I knew
Ugh.
you were gonna hate it. I'm glad I had you pegged right for hating that one. What about you,
Oh
Dana?
yes.
What's your bad movie of the
I'll
bunch?
Oh, the worst movie by far was The Born Losers. And that, as I said, and that was the one I started with. And it just, I think it took me another week or two to start another film because I'm like, oh my God, I can't, if they're all like this, I don't know if I can do anymore. It's kind of like, have you ever brushed your teeth and then drank orange juice? That's kind of the same taste.
There's a real art
Okay.
form. Oh, I've learned over a year now of doing this show. There's an art form to the prep. You got to ease your way in with something you're comfortable with. Then you throw some heavy in the mix and make sure you save a couple that you know you're sort of safe in.
So
Yes, I went
let me
back and did the Dirty Dozen, which is always one of my favorites.
let me address very quickly because you've kind of teed it up. I was going to wait towards the end of this, but this is the last episode of your first season. Okay. So let me do a quick address to camera. So which one is the one that's on my face? Is it that one?
It's the only one that's in front of you.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for helping me with that, Dad. All right. Let me just say, straight to camera, to all the future guests of this show, you know who you are, and I know you are watching or listening. Don't feel that you have to watch 169 movies and listen to 2 audiobooks in order to meet Andrew's ridiculous Cinewoke standards. Just because you haven't seen 5,000 other movies that Andrew has doesn't make you any less of a cinephile or worthy of a spot on this show. You don't have to watch 3 movies to prep for 5 strange Twitter questions that no one will actually care about the answers to 10 minutes after they're done listening to this show. Believe me, unless you're a cinemasochist like myself, trying to stave off depression and loneliness by remaining busy at all times, save yourself the hassle and limit your prep to between 10 to 15 films for most years. That will be more than adequate. Don't worry about the abominable dreck that Andrew likes because it makes him uncomfortable and therefore he's thinking. He's the Norman Bates of podcasting. Do what you like, have fun with it, spend time with others.
Just
Go
don't get in the
outside and
shower.
touch grass. This has been a public service announcement from the unofficial co-host of this show.
Just don't get into the shower.
So Tom, thank you for that. I now have Cinemasochist and Cinewoke on. Those are going to go on some bingo cards in the future, so I appreciate that.
I figured Cinewoke is how you judge others. You sit up in your ivory tower and say, I can't believe you haven't seen this movie and this movie and this movie. Allow for people to have the space to see something for the first time without prejudging whether they're a true film fan first.
I see. That's funny. I think of myself as a man of the people, not Cinewoke, but to each their own, I suppose. I can say to you, Tom, that intensity of prep in this season, which you've been vocal about, I think has actually done the inverse. And you've set future guests on a course where they are now going out of their way to prep their balls off. And I have people who will not be on this show for at least 8 to 10 months, some even further out, who have been prepping for 3 to 6 months already. And I'm now in the position where every guest that I think comes on this show from this point on will be far more prepared than I because of you. So you've actually done a disservice to everyone.
So in other words, guests in the future will be referred to as Revisionist Almanac eunuchs since they're working their balls off.
Well, to be fair, some of them don't have balls to begin with. Andrew's made a real kick to try and get more, let's say, women guests on the show.
Yes, the diversity is going to be increased going forward, but yes.
Yes, and all right, not Cinewoke at all.
All right, well, before we get into the categories...
I had to get that in there.
That's okay. There's a good chance you're going to hijack this thing multiple times tonight. It's the final episode of the season. I'm in a celebratory mood. We're going to let this thing go off the rails as many times as it needs to. It's worth mentioning if Tom, Dana, and I...
Why not?
Exactly. So if we all agree for any of the Oscars of the 6 categories we're going to dive into, that selection is going to skip online voting, get automatic entry into the Almanac. But in the event that any of us have disagreements with it, with what actually won, it's going to go to you, the listeners, to determine what should win. We're going to now go through those categories. We're going to wipe the slate clean, and then we're going to give our own nominations and our own winners. Let's get into the categories, gentlemen. Best Supporting Actress. You guys ready?
Actress. Okay.
Actress. We're going to start in the actress category. So the actual nominees for 1967 were Mildred Natwick for Barefoot in the Park, Catherine Ross for The Graduate, Bea Richards for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Carol Channing for Thoroughly Modern Millie, and winning the Oscar was Estelle Parsons for Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Dana, you're an experienced guest of the show, so I'm going to have you start us off in this category. So why don't you give us your 5 nominees and your winning actress in supporting?
Estelle Parsons for Bonnie and Clyde. She was probably the one redeeming quality of the entire film, although most of it's just her screaming and crying.
Yeah.
A lot.
So she was nominated. I always have enjoyed Carol Channing, even though it's a very conventional film. I did sit down and take a good look at, I did watch Valley of the Dolls. So I have Patty Duke. I thought Patty Duke's performance was outstanding in Valley of the Dolls. And I have Mildred Natwick, who was a longtime character actress before she had been on Broadway. I think she did the part on Broadway. Ironically, the Neil Simon play Barefoot in the Park was directed by Mike Nichols.
Dad.
But anyway.
You're stepping on everything.
You're cutting you at the knees on the trivia.
Okay. Anyway, and Bo Richards, or Bua. Is it Bea?
It's B.
B?
It's just B.
Okay, B Richards. And actually I have B Richards as the winner.
Okay.
Any particular reason why she took it over the other 4?
When I went back and watched it, and then I thought about it in detail, she was the one who had the most that she had to deal with within the time frame of the movie. She had to go from shocked to sympathetic to understanding in a very short period of time, and did it very convincingly. It was not something that I think it was just kind of like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be shocked and now I'm supposed to be understanding. You could see the process of her coming to terms with what was going on around her and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And for me, I thought she had the best growth within the film that I saw. So,
Tom, why don't we turn it over to you now? Who are your 5 nominees and winner?
So this might have been one of the more difficult years for both of the female categories. And I have a feeling that we're going to argue over screen time, as you do on most of your episodes, and category manipulation and who goes where and whatever else. I will establish that every time I've done this show, I have a very simple test for establishing whether you are a lead or a supporting performance. Do you appear in roughly 30% of the film, at least, and have at least one scene where you are the lead character or it's to yourself? And if not, then you are a supporting character. And in that case, like, I know you talked about Hannibal Lecter last time on 1996. He is a supporting character. I don't care what anybody says. That doesn't make much sense to me. But I digress. So there were actually a few interesting choices on this one, but Valley of the Dolls, if it weren't for that, even though I didn't find the movie particularly enjoyable, it had some good performances as far as the acting and kind of saved both of these categories. So first up, I'm just going to say Sharon Tate for Valley of the Dolls. I have her there. I also have Vanessa Redgrave for Blow Up, which also qualifies under the Oscar qualification rules we explained at the beginning of the show. The only person that from this movie I thought was anybody who actually had some movie acting quality, as opposed to seemingly just a really bad sitcom from the 60s, and that's Gene Simmons from Divorce American Style. I had Catherine Ross from The Graduate, and I have Anne Bancroft from The Graduate. And winning this in a landslide, a pretty obvious choice, Anne Bancroft is my winner.
Okay. Why don't you talk through your justification for Bancroft winning and being in this category?
The Oscar scene for her is going to be the conversation that she has with Dustin Hoffman, with the lights constantly going on and off, and he wants to talk, but she doesn't. And you see the life basically drain out of her, that this meaningless fling is only physical for her because she has nothing else. And yet, at the same time, by the second half of the movie, where you get to the second part of the love triangle, I think she's vicious and diabolical. And I don't know, there's a lot of depth to that character that I didn't find in a lot of other supporting characters this year. I thought by far and away, like, I almost started off, you had mentioned the concept of like pre-watch list choices last time. She would have been pretty high up my list on whichever category she ended up falling into. I hadn't kind of decided until I went back and watched to figure out the qualifying, but she was going to be high up on my list to begin with. Because as much as I like Catherine Ross in that film, she's kind of not given a lot to do. Whereas Anne Bancroft has to be sexy, but devious, but also like depressed, and you have to kind of like understand and sympathize with her in a way. So I think there's a lot of layers to that character that there isn't for several of the other ones this year.
I'm also so happy I didn't watch it because it didn't come through my purview, but I'm so glad you got to Blow Up. Antonioni's Blow Up is a wonderful film that I didn't, based on like the calendar, this didn't just fall into my purview.
I figured that I would try and surprise you with that one.
So did you enjoy Blow Up as a whole? Maybe that might tip your hand. You don't have to answer that.
There were parts of it I thought were really good. I didn't think it worked as a whole. I think about the point where he starts to realize about the murder, to me, became kind of thrilling, and I kind of enjoy a lot of those mystery box kind of things to begin with. So getting into more of the thriller aspects and looking forward to like a lot of 70s thrillers, to me, was worthwhile. But once it kind of got into the weird chase sequence near the end, I kind of lost the thread a little bit, and it took a long time for them to set things up. To me, this was an experimental film that didn't quite work, but I could appreciate at least the chances that he took in it.
And I have to mention you don't have Estelle Parsons in your 5. What do you think about her win?
How do you nominate somebody whose only contribution to a film is just
It's better than
Yeah.
the Leo grunting, I
like
suppose.
that's not acting? Well,
Yeah.
I'll leave that on the 2015 episode.
Okay, I'll get to mine, and then we'll go through some honorable mentions too. I'm sure there are some people that just missed the cut for you. So here's my 5 for 67 supporting actress. They're going to be in alphabetical order by the film, as I typically do. So I've got Catherine Ross for The Graduate. I think she's quite wonderful in that movie. I've got, and whether it's B or it's Bia, I've seen it pronounced both ways. I've got Bia Richards for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I'm going to do a little bit of category manipulation. I'm going to put Katharine Hepburn also in my supporting for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, even though I'm aware she won for lead actress. I just think that cast is kind of robustly supporting in general. So I just felt she was more.
I guess.
It was, I don't know. I'm looser and more subjective with my supporting versus lead than you are, Tom. I don't have a strict criteria. It just kind of hit me in a supporting way. So I got Katharine Hepburn here. I've got Natalie Delone for La Samurai. And then I've got Mary Tyler Moore, which kind of surprised me for Thoroughly Modern Millie. I really enjoyed what Mary Tyler Moore brought to that film.
I wish I could have seen it.
It was good.
It's
I enjoyed
really
it.
not available anywhere.
Yeah, I think I think that was a library copy I got from my local branch here, which has a really good selection of stuff. But yeah, I'm a Mary Tyler Moore fan. I thought she was really good in it. A little something different than I'm used to seeing her from TV. This category was not great.
Sure.
Not a good category. It was very thin. It was hard to find a lot below the 5, but it came down to 2, and it's the 2 women I've got in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Richards and Hepburn. I took shots at Hepburn in 81 for On Golden Pond. Thank God the voters got that right and revised that thing on social media, and so we don't have to talk about On Golden Pond ever again. And then I gave Hepburn my revised win for 42 up against you two guys, and you had Betty Davis and Now Voyager, which of course went on to win. Great pick for you guys. So I want to give Hepburn some more love here, but as much as I want to, the star of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner for me on this rewatch was Bea Richards. She blew me away, just knocked the doors off that movie. She's the focal point of the heart and the emotion of that film for me in a lot of ways. I don't know if I've ever really watched Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in the same way that I took it in this time. I just haven't seen it in probably a decade or more. And I found the parental figures a lot more fascinating than I have in the past and loved everything about it. So she's going to get my win. And I also don't have Estelle Parsons in my 5 because that is an abomination of a win or a nomination. She is grating and
I didn't
annoying
put her
in
on
a
my
way.
list.
It was awful. It's awful. I'm sorry, voters, if listeners right now who are going to vote on this category, go watch Bonnie and Clyde and watch Estelle Parsons and come back and tell me that you think that's the best performance of the year in this category. It's shockingly bad.
Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason to it. I didn't put her down on my list at all because I didn't want to consider it.
I tried everything I could to eliminate her. I know you both enjoyed Catherine Ross. I didn't find her performance that enticing, but in retrospect, I probably should have put her on instead of Estelle Parsons. I thought they were pretty close, and I went one direction. Probably should have went the other. But for me, the one candidate or the one actress for Best Supporting that I think came close to getting on my list was Judy Geeson from To Sir with Love, who was the teenage girl who fell in love with Poitier.
I just didn't feel like any of them really stood out from the others in that movie. I know there's like one that kind of has a semi relationship with it, but I thought most of the students, save for the one like cocky kid, really didn't really separate themselves. I thought it was a collective or an ensemble effort.
It was for the most part, but I thought her performance, because she had to be both the puppy dog in love and then start to mature and start to move on and see what adulthood was. It just was a very refreshing come of age without it being overly sexual and promiscuous performance. So I just enjoyed her in that and thought it was a well done thing. That she just missed off my top 5.
I'm kind of with
and
you.
Since you preempted Andrew's like cue to me or to anyone to give us who just missed our list, I'll give mine as well. But I had Kathy Rogier for La Samurai.
Okay.
She was my number 6.
I didn't have anyone with To Sir with Love on my list. I'm kind of with you there, Tom. I just had them all as sort of an amalgamation of like nothing really stood out to me in that particular category. Carol
I thought it was a
Channing,
fun film, but again, this is kind of like one of those Hallmarky
Yeah.
films.
that's exactly how I felt with To Sir With Love. I do love the Lulu song, though. I can't help it. It just reminds me of Boy Meets
Sure.
World when
We'll
Eric
get
sings it
to
at a
that
talent
later.
show. Yeah. So I had Carol
Yeah.
Channing and
We'll
Mildred
get to that
Natwick.
later.
A couple honorable mentions. I don't love this category. I'm happy with my 5. I don't think anyone else was getting in it for me. Let's move on to a better category, can we please?
It's your show
Okay.
for now.
So for now, so voters are going to have
You
3
crack the
options to
whip.
go with in this category. Dana and I, side by side together, we may have had our differences on Fight Club over on GMOAT, but we're holding hands once again. We've got B or Bea Richards in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Tom went with a little bit of category manipulation, but he's got Anne Bancroft from The Graduate over in this category. Or you can go with Estelle Parsons in Bonnie and Clyde. 3 solid options for the voters.
I like
Tom,
my
do you have a
chances
trivia?
on that one.
You got good chances,
I
buddy.
do, although the fact that Dana's already stolen 2 of my trivia questions. This is one that I asked on GMOAT last week, so you'll both will get it, but just for the sake of the audience. Everyone by now knows that there was only a 5-year age gap between Anne Bancroft and Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, but what movie did Dustin Hoffman back out of in order to star in The Graduate?
I know, but
I don't remember how much I was drinking at that point when we were talking about it last week. It was a long,
Well,
stressful week.
the reason why it's ironic is that he backed out of the producers. He was supposed to be the Nazi at the
That's right.
end of the film, and
it
he
was
did
not
it.
long.
Well,
Yeah.
he was supposed to work with Mel Brooks, who was married to Anne Bancroft.
I don't know. Were they married at that point in time, or did they?
According
just
to the book,
get...
they were already married
Okay.
because during the ceremony, I guess Mel kept making a lot of snide remarks and embarrassing the shit out of her.
You know what you're getting if you got
I believe
Melliture.
that's chapter 31 of the book. If you want to skip to that, so
I know. That was a great romance love story because I remember reading an article of the interview of her, and she said, "I don't know why, but every time this short little Jew comes up the driveway, I get my heart just flutters."
So I do have a secondary one, although since I've had 2 of them stolen, we probably should save that one.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's jump over to supporting actor. So, 1967, the Academy nominated this year Gene Hackman for Bonnie and Clyde, Michael J. Pollard also for Bonnie and Clyde, John Cassavetes for The Dirty Dozen, Cecil Kellaway for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and the winner on that night was George Kennedy for Cool Hand Luke. Tom, you get to start things off in this category. Who do you have nominated and winning supporting actor?
So I will start out with some of the chalk that I have. I had Cecil Kellaway for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I have George Kennedy for Cool Hand Luke. I have Gene Hackman, the always great Gene Hackman. Even he couldn't make Bonnie and Clyde great, but at least he was good. And I also have Lee Van Cleef for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I have a second nomination for Best Supporting Actor in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I have Clint Eastwood. And my winner is Lee Van Cleef.
I love the winner pick. Can you explain Eastwood in supporting versus lead?
Watch the movie again. It is not Eastwood's movie. He's on the poster, but it is somebody else who leads the movie. He is in almost every scene. We rarely get moments of Eastwood ever leading a scene. He's in a majority of the movie, but he is very rarely ever. It's told from the perspective of either Lee Van Cleef or Eli Wallach. And so I have Eli Wallach coming up later.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to argue with that. What do you think about George Kennedy in general? You obviously have him in your 5. Do you like that performance? Do you think that's a good win in history?
I don't mind it. I think he was very good in the movie. He's one of the few parts that I really find to be decent about the movie. For the most part, Newman and Kennedy are pretty much the only 2 that I really care about all that much in that film. Most of it, as far as a plot and a storyline, doesn't exactly work for me. I think it's kind of dated. There are some references and some historical context as far as like chain gangs and such that I find to actually be rewarding as a film goer, but for the most part, you're watching it because Paul Newman's in it. Other than that, I think that movie ranks very low on our overall list. Like, I want to say it's in the bottom 30 of the GMOAT list. There's nothing that's particularly great about it per se. But the problem for me is always going to be because I am my father's son and I grew up on Naked Gun 2.5 when it was still in the VHS era. George Kennedy for me will always be the lieutenant in Naked Gun as opposed to this. So, do I have fault for it? No, because I do think he's probably better than the other favorite who was the other guy from Bonnie and Clyde, not Gene Hackman. I can't think of his name right now.
Michael Pollard.
Yeah, Michael Pollard, he's fine in the movie, but given that I think for the most part that movie should not really be rewarded, I'm okay with George Kennedy getting it here. I also don't quite. I know that when we did it back in our first season, I thought that Cassavetes was good, but I don't even think he's necessarily the best supporting character in that film. So for me, I think that this is probably the best way to go. But
Did you
Kellaway,
find? Yeah. What about Kellaway?
like I will say, is very endearing as like the guy who keeps thumbing his nose, at least from religion, telling the old Hollywood couple that is handing the torch to kind of the new age of Hollywood couples that it's okay for this social change to happen. And he's thumbing his nose constantly at them. I find him to be like lovable and endearing. So he was always going to probably find a place on this list for me.
Did you find that the overall amount of supporting actors in the Dirty Dozen, some to a degree, maybe cannibalized each other in your rankings? And if you had to pick one supporting actor from the Dirty Dozen, who's your favorite? Is it Cassavetes? Is it someone else?
I would say it's probably Charles Bronson. Like, I think you could make a decent case for Ernest Borgnine, but it's probably Bronson for me. I'll just be honest, I don't really think The Dirty Dozen is a very good film. I know it's a personal favorite for people related to me, but
Yes,
All right,
because it was
well,
one of my dad's favorites,
I know.
and so I watched it often, every time it was on.
I'll get to mine, and then we'll close it up with Dana, and we'll see how many of these Dirty Dozen gentlemen make it into your 5. We'll find out. So my nominations for Best Supporting Actor are going to be George Kennedy for Cool Hand Luke, John Cassavetes for The Dirty Dozen. I have both Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Tom, I don't hate the Clint Eastwood in supporting Justification, and Eli Wallach, I think putting him in lead, I'm hip to that game a little bit, but I still think I feel like it just feels like more of a Clint piece, but I respect the manipulation there. And then my 5th nominee is going to go to Roy E. Glenn Sr. for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, who also really kind of took my breath away.
Is he
I love
Poitier's dad in the film?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'm a big fan of a couple of scenes he's in. I think he has a lot of gravitas to his overall demeanor. Really liked what he did there. I like my 5. I'm pretty happy with all 5 of those. I think any of them could get a good shout, but at the end of the day, I think my vote's going to go to The Reason the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is so iconic, and that's going to be Eli Wallach. I think that the other 2 Dollars trilogy films are desperately missing him and his involvement, and I think he's the reason why The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has shown through all these years later as the one of these seminal westerns out there.
I absolutely adore him in this movie. I think it is his movie, which again, this was a late change for me. I had him winning this category until yesterday or the day before when I finished the film, and I'm like, was he actually the lead? And so that's when I kind of changed it, but he is one of the most iconic characters in cinema for me. I know The Man with No Name has more name recognition and Clint has more name recognition, but Eli Wallach is the most recognizable character from that movie, bar none.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the movie countless times at this point in my life, but the next time I watch it, I'm going to really specifically try to hone in on the dynamic with the three and see if I can maybe extract some of what you did, where you have Eli Wallach as a lead. I've just always viewed him somewhat secondary, even though I think whenever he's in the scenes, he steals everything he's in. I mean, he's dynamic. He's lightning in that movie. So he's going to get my win. Dana, let's go over to you. Who do you have nominated and winning?
I have in no specific order. I do have George Kennedy. I have Gene Hackman. I have Cecil Calloway from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
3 I did, yeah.
I have Eli Wallach. And my fifth is Donald Sutherland. I really enjoyed Donald Sutherland's character.
Oh, the Dirty Dozen. I was trying to remember which movie he was in. Okay.
Yeah. And really enjoyed his character. Actually, I thought his character had more significance in the film than Cassavetes. I know Cassavetes was kind of the gruff, contrarian, but I really liked Donald Sutherland's part and thought that Sutherland did a great job and was not properly recognized for it. The winner I have is Eli Wallach.
I think this is going to be a weird category to split the vote on. I mean, no one's going to vote for George Kennedy, but the fact that we have Wallach versus Lee Van Cleef
feels fitting. It really does kind of feel fitting of the film for those two to be duking it out. And look at me, Dana and I just having a bromance again. We've settled our beef. What about you guys? Any close contenders, honorable mentions? I'll quickly throw out a couple and then I'll turn it over to you. Phil Harris. I'm not one who goes out of my way to give animation voice acting nominations, and I know we've had many guests in the past on this show who have really been champions of animation, but I do really love, he's the voice of Baloo in the Jungle Book, and I just watched that movie again over the weekend. I love his voice work in that. And then Gene Hackman for Bonnie and Clyde was close. I like what Gene Hackman does. Like you said, Tom, you're rarely going to get a subpar Gene Hackman anything, and he does a lot to pull Bonnie and Clyde into being a good film.
My number 7 was Tetsuro Tanba from You Only Live Twice. I really enjoy that character. It's one of the few times that like one of these supporting allies of James Bond actually like identifies himself and makes himself more of a character outside of maybe like Felix Leiter. And for my number 6, a role that was small, but I thought really contributed a lot to the film, and he will possibly come up later, but Scott Wilson from In the Heat of the Night.
So this is, before we get over to Dana, this is the first mention of a James Bond film on the episode. You two are both Bond aficionados, I think would be an adequate term.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you rank You Only Live Twice in the Bond lineage? Like how do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it kind of in the middle?
We should actually do an episode of GMOAT that's like ranking all the Bond films.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
That might actually be quite fun. You Only Live Twice because I am much more endearing to the Connery Bonds.
Yeah.
I don't have it above. I would have it above Dr. No because that one's still kind of like dipping its toe in the water. But I think it's probably the second worst of the Connery Bonds. And that's partially because like Diamonds Are Forever for me holds like a special importance. That was like the first Bond film I really ever saw. And so that's got a little bit of extra essence. But it's still above several of the Roger Moore Bonds, and it's definitely above anything T. Dalt ever did. Timothy Dalton, like, he wasn't a bad Bond by himself, but the movies that surrounded him were dreadful. License to Kill, I think I watched it again for the first time in like 10 years. Last Christmas or something, we had it on, Dad.
Yeah.
And it is awful. Just awful. That's going to probably, depending on what you include as a James Bond film. Technically, we had Casino Royale, the Woody Allen, David Niven one this year that I didn't even bother to watch. But if you include that, then that would probably come below it. But License to Kill is like way at the bottom. Like, it might be the worst Bond film ever made. And I don't even count, like, No Time to Die was not a great Bond film, but it's miles better than License to Kill.
Yeah. So I would rate it more the middle of the pack. but still,
that's probably about right.
yeah.
Like, it's not ahead of GoldenEye. It's not going to be ahead of most of the other Connery Bonds. Casino Royale and Skyfall are definitely ahead of it. I think it would just be ahead of Quantum of Solace for me. Even though I like Quantum of Solace, it's just a very imperfect Bond film. I think I might have Spectre above You Only Live Twice, though. I don't know. There's some iconic things that still come from it that definitely are contributory to Austin Powers, which also helps. But
well, hopefully you will do a James Bond full rankings at GMOAT over there sometime. I think that'd be a good one for the listeners.
I think what we should do is like a live episode of it. I just
there you go,
because that's the only way we're gonna fit it in.
Yeah,
there you go. All right, Dana, what about you? Any honorable mentions in this category that just didn't get in the
I
five?
had 3. 8th for me was Richard Jekyll from The Dirty Dozen. Longtime character actor. This is where I really started to notice him as a character actor, and really thought his performance as the prison guard to be very well done. Next, I have in that group, I have Charles Bronson because I love his performance in The Dirty Dozen. And then
Telly Savalas?
No, not
really.
From that. No, I have Warren Oates from Heat of the Night.
Oh, sure. I thought for sure you'd put Telly Savalas somewhere around here, but okay.
No, it was such a creepy performance. I have a hard time with it.
It's such a weird performance.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it's in the movie, really. Other than maybe some like conflictual action, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I worked really hard to try to get William Daniels in my 5. Mr. Feeney. He popped up.
He's still
he was
alive. He's like
it's
95.
Unbelievable.
The voice kit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's okay in The Graduate.
I completely forgot he was in that movie.
I did too.
Completely forgot he was in that movie.
Totally. And he's in another film called Two for the Road, which came out in '67, which actually had him a little higher on. And then I don't think I've ever done this before. I'll throw out my bottom of my power rankings. Richard Attenborough. I like Richard Attenborough. He's awful in Dr. Dolittle. He's worse than Jim Brown in The Dirty Dozen. He's fucking awful. Sorry, Richard
Jim
Attenborough.
Brown
I had to take
not
a shot.
Good.
Not good. No, not good. No. All right. Well, the voters are going to have 3
but when
options.
I was a kid and Jim Brown was killed, I cried because I loved Jim Brown. But oh well.
All right. Well, there's going to be 2 good, the bad, and the ugly choices in this category. There's Lee Van Cleef, who Tom had, and then both Dana and myself had Eli Wallach, or you can side with the Academy, who had George Kennedy in Cool Hand Luke. Tom, you got some trivia for us in this category?
Yes. Which legendary Oscar nominee scored his first of his eventual 54 nominations for Valley of the Dolls?
I know the answer, so I'll let Dana
Yes.
pontificate.
John Williams.
Ding, ding.
There's a fantastic John Williams documentary that just went up relatively recently on Disney Plus. I would highly recommend anyone who's a fan of any of his composing work, check it out. You'll be thoroughly enjoyed with some of the behind the scenes stuff you get with him and Spielberg. Great stuff.
Excellent. Might have to put that on the Christmas watch list.
Oh, great choice.
By the way,
for
did anybody know? Yeah, but another trivia question. Did anybody know how Eli Wallach got hooked up with Sergio Leone?
I do not.
Eli Wallach's acting coach was Lee Strasberg's in the Actors Studio. And so Leone contacted the Actors Studio and asked for input for potential actors to play parts in his movies.
I don't know of anything else he's ever been in except for one film that I usually like to watch around this time of year, The Holiday, which I find him to be like delightful in.
He was did mostly stage acting, but he did a few films.
Yeah, I pretty much only think of him in this one movie, definitely. All right, well, let's jump over to the Best Actress category now. So the nominees in 1967 were Faye Dunaway for Bonnie and Clyde, Anne Bancroft for The Graduate, Audrey Hepburn for Wait Until Dark, Edith Evans for The Whisperers, and the woman that ruled the day that year was the immortal Katharine Hepburn for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I'm going to drop a little bit of trivia on you right now. So Edith Evans from The Whisperers was the last performer born in the 1880s to receive an acting nomination. And speaking of Edith Evans really quickly, friend of the show Carlo from the Movie Loot on Twitter wanted us to know that her performance in that movie is one of the best female performances he's ever seen, as evidenced by his 4.5-star review on Letterboxd. So high praise from Carlo for The Whisperers. We'll see if any of us feel that way about Edith Evans. I'm going to start things off in this category, then we'll go over to you guys. So my nominations for 1967 Best Actress. First up is Catherine Deneuve for Belle de Jour. Second up is Faye Dunaway for Bonnie and Clyde. Third, I have Anne Bancroft for The Graduate. Fourth, I have Nadine Nortier from Mouchette. And fifth, I have Audrey Hepburn. There it is. All right, Tom, come at me. What do you got on Mouchette?
I don't have anything. I just figured you were going way out of your way to read all of these like French names.
I assume
I didn't bother to watch.
I assume you didn't watch Mouchette. It's really wonderful, and Nadine is tremendous in it.
I'll take your word for it. I have no intention of ever putting it on.
Okay. I thought compared to supporting actress, I had a lot more fun with lead actress this year. I thought showed relative depth and quality, variety. I'm split on three. It came down to Anne Bancroft, Audrey Hepburn, Faye Dunaway, three gargantuan women. I think The Graduate hinges on the Bancroft performance as Mrs. Robinson. She's multifaceted, seductive, intelligent. I think she's terrific. As impressed as I was by Hepburn in Wait Until Dark, and as much as I love Faye Dunaway and Bonnie and Clyde, Anne Bancroft is going to get my vote for Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate. I think she's got to win for me. Not much else to say.
This.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dana, let's go over to you now. Let's see where you're going to go with lead actress.
All right. Again, in not any particular order. I actually got through about half of The Whisperers, and I can understand the concept of why Dame Edith Evans is considered or why she was nominated. It was a very solid performance. So I have her on the list. I also got through about half of Wait Until Dark, which is a film that when I go back, I'm going to go try and watch the entire film, because not only does Audrey Hepburn have a very good part and does a very good job. Alan Arkin, Jack Weston, and Richard Crenna being in that film. It was really good, and I'm kind of anxious to going back and watching the entire film again. So I have Audrey Hepburn. I also have Catherine Deneuve. I thought her performance in Belle de Jour was very good. She portrayed both innocence and the hidden eroticism that occurs with people having fantasies. There was an innocence about her, but yet not, that she was able to convey. I have Anne Bancroft and I have Katharine Hepburn. Will admit that I am not a Faye Dunaway fan. I do not think that Faye Dunaway is that great of an actress. I think most of her performances are her just being a bitch, and the people are acting like her attitude is acting, and I don't think that's the case. So I do not have her in my list.
I think it only works in network personally, but that's just me.
Yeah, and even there, it's the same thing. I don't think her acting was that great. I think it was the character she was portraying that it
just married well to what her personality was.
Yeah. And I have Anne Bancroft as Best Actress.
3 for 3, you and me, Dana.
This is going to be completely inverted. I'll just say that right now compared to the old one. So I had Anne Bancroft for supporting actress, and I have Katharine Hepburn winning this category. So it's just complete reversal. So they're going to go head to head twice.
I'm always game for something new.
Of my category, because I only had 6 women out of the like 15 or 15 and a half films that I watched that I even thought could be considered for this category.
Wow.
I have 5 Patty Duke for Valley of the Dolls, 4 Debbie Reynolds for Divorce American Style, 3 Faye Dunaway, again by default in Bonnie and Clyde, and Barbara Perkins number 2 for Valley of the Dolls. I thought Hepburn's the runaway in this one because, frankly, it's the only one of the 3-ish films, 4-ish films that I thought actually I enjoyed her performance.
So you didn't get around to Belle de Jour?
I started it, got 10 minutes in, said, what the fuck is this? This must be another Andrew special, and turned it off.
I got through it on purpose just so that I could, like, rub your nose in it, Tom.
I don't care. I don't
And I
have
actually
time
thought
for
it was
that shit.
was
I have a
decent
boss
film.
who's got too many expectations and a very limited schedule, so.
Which boss is that? Oh, I have high expectations, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest problem I had with Belle de Jour is I'm trying to watch it while I'm doing paperwork in my office during the business days, and people kept stopping in and going, "What's this?" Well, it's a French film, and it's about a woman having sexual fantasies, working in a brothel. Oh. And then I could just see, like, and you're watching this during business hours.
Great choice, Dad.
I'm the boss. I don't care.
Now, Dana, tell me if you also have extracted this same, maybe you haven't thought about it, maybe you have. Every time I go back and watch Belle de Jour, which I've seen multiple times now, I've had to do another podcast earlier this year for another show where I did every movie by this particular director. But every time I watch Catherine Deneuve in this film, I see Emma Stone in Poor Things. I feel like there's a lot of like connective tissue between those two characters in ways where you sort of describe them as sort of being innocent and yet also sort of sexually adventurous and playful and fantasizing. I don't know. I never really made that connection until I sort of revisited Belle de Jour this year after Poor Things has come out.
Don't remind my dad of Poor Things.
Well, I know that's not really his cup of tea. And so when he said Deneuve, I thought, oh, okay, that's an interesting in for me to maybe ask that question.
Boy, I have a hard time. I'd have to think about that for a while. The Poor Things to me was so over the top that I have a hard time. I think this was much more subtle, even though it was set with fantasies and she's in a brothel. The fact that it was, and I kept saying to people, I said, actually, for a French film, even in the 1960s, it was a lot more reserved than I thought it would be. I mean, it's a film that I remember as a kid, people commenting about or being mentioned all the time in places like, as being more of a racy film. But when I watched it, I was kind of shocked at to how reserved it was. So I guess I would have a problem with that. I'm trying to think of a film that would be offhand where the person was more, I don't know, more sexually reserved than in Poor Things. Poor Things just seemed to me to be sexual gratification for the purposes of shock.
That makes sense. I thought I'd ask that point because I did not expect Catherine Deneuve to come out of your mouth during this episode. That is a stunning nomination for me, but I love seeing it. Okay, so we're some honorable mentions. There's no real point. You've basically got nothing else on the board.
I have one, but yeah, it's Judy Geeson for To Sir with Love. I mean,
okay.
I guess if you're going to pull one out that's like a lead kind of performance, it's the only other one I could really see. But most of the films that you watch, there are a lot of men. The Dirty Dozen. I'm trying to think of In the Heat of the Night, a lot of men. Cool Hand Luke, a lot of men. It's a very male-dominated year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Dana, any honorable mentions for you?
No, actually, no. I don't have. I'm just trying to go back through, and I'm not finding anything. No.
Edith Evans is probably the one I wish I could have tried to get a spot in there for. I just really appreciated that little nugget of trivia. I thought The Whisperers was pretty solid. I liked my 5, so I wasn't gonna push too hard to get Edith in there.
There were several films that if I had had time or availability to try and watch them, like Audrey Hepburn, I thought would have been a good one. I heard a lot of good things in the audiobook about Edith Evans for this particular year, and I think she won the SAG Award and like the Critics' Choice Award for that particular role, and then somehow Hepburn ended up winning in the end, which was kind of unusual because this was only her second Oscar. She'd gone like 30 years in between, essentially. I think it was 1934, and then this was like her second one, so it was kind of an unusual Oscar to come back later in life. But I don't know. I mean, there just are not a lot of great female parts. Let me ask one question on this, since you did watch Thoroughly Modern Millie. How was Julie Andrews in that one?
She was my number 7. She was kind of right on the bubble.
Okay.
I very much enjoyed what Julie Andrews brought to that film.
I've never been disappointed seeing her in a film.
I would think you would appreciate that movie if you do ever get around to it. I think that's a movie that probably would be kind of in your wheelhouse.
If it were like available to rent, or like my Plex daddy was a little bit different, he might have that on there. I mean, I would have definitely watched it, but it was not available.
Totally fair. All right, well, 2 options in this category. Tom already said it. We're going to be seeing these women battle again. You can go with both Dana and myself. We have Anne Bancroft in The Graduate, and then Tom and the Academy are walking together with Katharine Hepburn in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Can Dana and I run the table and go 6 for 6 together? That would be crazy.
We're only halfway through, so don't count
We can
your
hold
horses
hands
quite
and
yet.
walk into the sunset.
But I want to say it would be weird, but I think kind of fitting for this year if like Anne Bancroft won both categories, or Katharine Hepburn won both categories.
It's gonna happen one of these years with just the nature of the show and guests coming on and the way we're manipulating categories. It almost happened on 2015 with Alicia Vikander, who was sort of in play for both supporting and lead category.
Great
All right,
actress.
You
Tom.
hear me, voters? Come on, let's do it. Show less respect for this year by doing it.
Tom, do you have some trivia for us, or was this one of the ones where Dana stole your thunder?
Oh no, I still got more. All right. What event delayed the 1968 Oscars by 2 days?
Well, I know the answer. I'm assuming Dana probably
I do
knows as
too.
a historian. Yeah. So it would be the assassination of Martin Luther King, unfortunately.
Yes.
As the song says, April 4th, a shot rang out in the Memphis sky.
You have to talk into the mic.
As the song says, April 4th, a shot rang out in the Memphis sky, from a little Irish band.
Very little, very little.
Well, I'll just say, again, this is one I took from the book, but the ceremony was supposed to be hosted on Monday. His funeral and burial were supposed to be on Tuesday. And so most people said, out of respect, given the momentum of what happened, they were not going to show up if it was on Monday. So they made the executive decision to delay it by 2 days, and then everybody decided to show up again.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of pressure Sidney Poitier put on them because he was one of the major holdouts. If memory serves me correctly, he was.
It wasn't just him. It was literally everybody said they were not going to come.
You have to understand, Gregory Peck was huge. I think he was president of the Academy that year yet.
Yes.
And he was huge
president of the Academy until like 1969,
movement.
1970. And to be quite fair, the 2 big performances during that Oscars were Louis Armstrong and Sammy Davis Jr. They were not going to show up to that Oscars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, good stuff. Good stuff with the trivia, Tom. You're not hitting me with some of the crazy zingers you have in episodes of the past. So you're keeping it nice.
Keeping it a little bit more contained.
Yes.
By the way, who won the Thalberg Award for that Academy Award?
Alfred Hitchcock, with one of the shortest speeches ever. He said, "Thank you," then tried walking off, then came back very much.
Yeah, and by the time he came back,
it was like so short.
The orchestra was already playing by the time he came back, so you can't actually audibly hear him say anything else. Like, he's clearly mouthing it into the microphone, but the orchestra's playing, so all you hear is "thank you," and he just kind of abruptly walks out. Great stuff. All right, let's get to the best.
Later, I think he got a Golden Globe Award and spent quite a long time thanking or commenting about his wife. I just saw the clip of that recently. So called
Did
her
he
the
go
greatest
like?
editor he ever worked with.
Did he go Greer Garson like 8 minutes?
Probably about that. I mean, it was,
Wow.
he said that the greatest editor he ever worked with, the greatest screenwriter he ever collaborated with, the greatest, he had 4 different things. And he says, it's all in my wife. So,
All right. Well, let's get to the actor category now. So the nominees in 1967 were Warren Beatty for Bonnie and Clyde, Paul Newman for Cool Hand Luke, Dustin Hoffman for The Graduate, Spencer Tracy for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and winning the gold statue was Rod Steiger for In the Heat of the Night. A little piece of trivia, and hopefully I'm not stealing anything Tom has hidden up his sleeve. 1967 is the only year where 2 films, Bonnie and Clyde and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, received nominations in all 4 acting categories. Tom, was that your little trivia bit?
No.
I imagine it wasn't. Okay. All right. We're going to go to Dana to lead things off in this category. Dana, what do you got for us in Best Actor?
I have Rod Steiger in Heat of the Night. I have Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate. I have Paul Newman in Cool Hand Luke. I have Spencer Tracy in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And I have Sidney Poitier from To Sir with Love.
Interesting that you went with that. He has 3 big films, and that's the one you went with. Okay.
Well, I liked his performance in it. And maybe, and I'll be honest, maybe that film connected with me because I watched it after the election, and the film is all about respect and treating people with dignity and such. And maybe that's why it connected with me.
It's an endearing film. Don't get me wrong. Like, I watched it a couple of months back already in prep for this, and I really enjoyed it. But you have 3 different choices for him that year. I don't think you can go wrong with them necessarily.
No.
But for most people, that's going to be number 3 of their choices if they're nominating him for one of these.
And maybe I really meant, in retrospect, if it wasn't but for the election, maybe it would have been for In the Heat of the Night. Any one of those 3 performances to me was spectacular. I mean, he was in such a frame or a moment in a career that was just mind-boggling that he could put on those 3 performances. So you could pick any one of the 3 and it would be fine.
Now, and the critics hated 2 of those movies, and they still did well. And again, from the historical context, it signaled to people, oh, we actually have to make stuff for Black audiences.
Yeah. And no matter, I have a strong proclivity towards Spencer Tracy, and I've always loved Spencer Tracy. He's one of my
Wisconsin's
favorites.
Own.
Yeah. And, I mean, but when I watched it again, they kind of limited what the performance had to be. I know he was real sick. They would take breaks in the afternoon so he could nap, so he could continue to perform. The best portion of the performance that almost carried him for me was the last monologue. And that monologue was done on one take. And from what I understand, from retrospect, I guess, is Tracy had indicated that this was kind of a heartfelt monologue towards Katharine Hepburn herself, which the tears are real because she realizes that he's talking really about her, even though this is words written for him, and that she knows he's not going to be around much longer. And so that almost carried the day, but I still have to go with Rod Steiger. And I think the Academy got it right because the performance was so good. You hate him and love him, and you see the growth that is taking place during the film, that he kind of understands that maybe his own prejudices are not valid by the end. And I think that in and of itself in 1967 was a 8.5 on the Richter scale as far as American society. at least in a large portion of the United States.
Okay. Well, Tom, why don't we go over to you now and see if you're going to zig or zag or where you're going to end up?
Well, I already indicated I was going to zag a lot on this one, but I also have Paul Newman. I mean, it's hard not for me to like a Paul Newman performance. I just love Paul Newman, but I have Poitier for In the Heat of the Night. You have to have him for one of these three performances. The fact that he didn't garner any nomination, to me, is just criminal. I have Spencer Tracy, who until like 2 or 3 days ago was my number one, but he just misses out because I think there's somebody a little bit more iconic, a little bit more lasting as a overall character and performance. 5, this is going to be my token nomination, and this is where I start to burn the motherfucker down right now, but I have Sean Connery for You Only Live Twice, because this may be the only opportunity I have to nominate Sean Connery for James Bond, and I'm going to take my fucking opportunity. So he's my number 5. It's a token nomination. I don't give a shit. And number 1, with a bullet point, my winner, as I said before, is Eli Wallach for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
So you do not have Rod Steiger in your 5.
No, I Will Stand on an Island. That is a cartoonish performance. I don't get it at all. He is not multidimensional. There is one scene that you can kind of get it, but the chewing the gum thing is just stupid, and I don't quite get why this was like exceptional, and he was by far the clear favorite. To me, this is a makeup Oscar for 2 years prior when it got stolen out from under him by Lee Marvin when he was the clear favorite. Lee Marvin wins for Cat Ballou for some ungodly reason. And so everybody in the industry respected Steiger enough to give him his makeup Oscar, but no, Poitier is the better performance in this film by far. It's not close. When Poitier does the seminal moment of returning the slap against the white racist plantation owner in the garden, that is the moment maybe of 1967 at that time.
Okay. Yep. I'll leave it there for a second. I'll get into mine and then we'll see where I fall. I will confirm though, Dana and I are no longer going to be 100% lockstep. We're not going to be together on this one. I know. We were having such a fun time. Okay, here's my 5 best actor. Paul Newman, Cool Hand Luke. Clint Eastwood, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Dustin Hoffman for The Graduate. Sidney Poitier for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And Sidney Poitier for In the Heat of the Night. I wasn't sure. I thought I might put all 3 of Poitier's performances in my 5. He's on such a heater this year. It's like one of the great in-form years an actor's ever had. It's unbelievable. Tom.
And I wouldn't have had any reason to say no. I mean, you could very easily find one, multiple. I mean, I very easily thought that he could get multiples from me, but there were some very good lead actor performances this year.
Absolutely, for sure. I will fully go on the island with you, Tom, on Rod Steiger. I just don't fully think that performance holds up so well anymore. I don't know. I think you described it as cartoonish. Was that your exact adjective? Because that's kind of,
I believe so, yeah,
my overall takeaway from that performance. I just, it's kind of over the top in a melodramatic way that doesn't ring true for me.
Like In the Heat of the Night is a very good TV Hallmark movie that the performance fits in. Like, I don't think he's out of place necessarily in that movie, but it fits a style and a quality that over time just doesn't hold up for me as far as the quality when we're talking true best actors. And I don't mean to put my dad like out on an, I thought I would be on this island by myself and you'd both be arguing against me. If you like the performance, Dad, I know there are people out there like our mutual friend Kieran is high on Rod Steiger on their episode of Best Picture Cast. They were really effusive in their praise for him. I just don't get it.
Let me put it this way. Andrew, how old are you?
I'm 39.
And Tom, you were 34?
Yes.
I will be 61 in 2 weeks. I knew Rod Steiger. I knew cops that were just like that. And I grew up in Wisconsin. That's why the performance means more to me, I think, than to you. By the time you guys got to adulthood, police officers did not behave that way. But I saw police officers behave that way. And
Yeah, I don't.
to me, it means much more. It's in context. It's more of the tapestry of racism that I grew up in. So it has much more poignance to me, probably, than you, who are 30 years younger than me.
Yeah, I can't argue that at all. I mean, yeah, I'm a victim of the time. Like you said, Dana, I've never been around someone like that. So it's easy for me to call it cartoonish because I've never seen it in real time, whereas you have seen that face to face. So yeah, I'm not discrediting your opinion. I thought I was going to be on the island on Rod Steiger. So it's kind of funny that Tom and I both kind of fell there. However, of the picks that I've got out there, the five, I feel bad that I'm not giving Poitier my win, just considering the year he's had in 67, but I feel like it would be disingenuous to give it to him for sort of a totality when there's one performance to me that's like legendary beyond the rest. And he might be known for salad dressing at this point in time, but Paul Newman in Cool Hand Luke, that is just one of the great performances for me personally. It's the defining role of his career for me as well. And so Paul Newman and Cool Hand Luke's going to get my personal win. Let's
I
get
don't
over
know
to
if I'd
Slap
agree on
shot?
that.
Yeah.
But
I'd probably go Cool Hand Luke over Slapshot.
I think I'd probably have both the Hustler and the Sting above Cool Hand Luke, but fair. Like, as long as you
his
have Cool Hand
performance
Luke
in-
above the Verdict, we're good.
Yeah, I like his
do.
performance in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid too.
And that's fair. Yeah.
So
I mean, there are a lot of good Paul Newman movies, so I'm not complaining in any regard. Except The Verdict. The Verdict is terrible.
I have a 2 degree of separation Paul Newman story that I could share at some point in time, but
Go for it.
Go.
Wait, hold on. No, don't. No. This is a secondhand story. You've told it before. By the way, isn't The Verdict on 1982?
It is.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I wasn't gonna. I wasn't gonna say anything
floater.
about.
I'll try and keep an open mind this time, but no. Okay.
Yeah.
What about honorable mentions for you guys? I'll throw a couple out, and then I'll turn it over to you. Warren Beatty in Bonnie and Clyde was in the mix, I'll say. Toshiro Mifune, who I'm a big fan of in Samurai Rebellion, was sort of in the mix. And then Alain Delon from Le Samurai is a really fantastic acting performance for me. What about you guys?
I had David Hemmings for Blow Up as my number 7, and Robert Blake for In Cold Blood is my number 6. I thought Robert Blake was actually really good in that movie. All the other things about Robert Blake aside.
Well, it started kind of his return to adult stardom, which was the Beretta TV show in the 70s and such. But yes, I thought he was a good actor. Unfortunately, the end of his career
was too far away from the mic.
The end of his career was a little bizarre, to say the least. I had Lee Marvin for The Dirty Dozen. But then again, like I said, I always have a proclivity towards that film.
Yeah, I thought Lee Marvin had a good year in general. He was in The Dirty Dozen. He was also in a film called Point Blank, which I thought was pretty solid. So a couple of Lee Marvins in there that I had kind of in the mix. But at the end of the day, we're going to have 3 options for voters to listen to vote on. They can go with Dana and the Academy, who are together on Rod Steiger for In the Heat of the Night. They can go with my pick. I've got Paul Newman for Cool Hand Luke. And then Tom has taken Eli Wallach in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in the lead category. All right, Tom.
I think that might be one of the weirdest mashups and head-to-heads of all time, but I am definitely curious to see Eli Wallach versus Paul Newman.
I think Wallach's going to do better for me in supporting. Tom, you got any trivia for us before we get to director?
All right. Let's see here. What do we got queued up? 1968 Oscars featured 2 people who won consecutive acting Oscars as nominees. Name all the actors to win consecutive Oscars.
Tom Hanks. Spencer Tracy.
Correct.
How many are there in totality?
did not tell you that on purpose, but I suppose I can give you that hint if you really want it.
And by actor, are you using the generic or using the gender specific?
No, I'm using the generic to cover all bases.
Okay. Walter Brennan?
No. I think he won 3 in 5 years as supporting actor, but I don't think he won consecutively. I tried to look for that just in case, but he is not one of the 5 people. So you've named 2.
I feel like there was
I'll
somebody.
give you another
recently.
hint. You named the 2 that are best actor consecutive winners.
Meryl Streep?
No.
Katharine Hepburn?
Katharine Hepburn won this year and the following year. So yes, she is also one.
You said there was another from this year as well?
So Spencer
no?
Tracy was nominated, but he
Tracy.
didn't win. But yes,
Okay.
they were both featured in the acting categories. So the other ones, and I know you guys might have a difficult time with one of them, but I will say there was one who won consecutive Best Supporting Actors awards in 1967 and 77.
1967 and 77?
No, excuse me, 76 and 77. If I missaid that.
You have stumped me.
No.
Jason Robards for Julia and All the President's Men. The other one you have absolutely no chance of getting, but it's Luis Rayner for The Great Ziegfeld and Good Earth in 1937 and 38.
Never would have got that. Just watched a Jason Robards movie today that you guys will be talking about on your show here in a couple of weeks, Magnolia. I'm
yes.
dying to hear what you guys say about Magnolia.
Well, I told Dad what kind of my understanding of the ending was, and he, what? I've never seen it, so I have no idea.
Yeah, that'll be a good GMOAT. Okay, let's get to the director category now, guys. So the directors nominated in 67 were Mike Nichols for The Graduate, Stanley Kramer for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Richard Brooks for In Cold Blood, Norman Jewison for In the Heat of the Night, and the glory that year went to Arthur Penn for his directorial effort on Bonnie and Clyde. Tom, kick us off for this category.
Mike Nichols won.
Mike Nichols won.
Well, there you go. There's my first show note error. Mike Nichols with the win. I'm bound to make an error one time in 12
question
months.
About.
Fair enough. We'll make sure we try and pay attention for the next one.
All right, what do you got, Tom?
Who is starting? Oh, me? Okay.
You're gonna start us.
Number 5, I have Michelangelo Antonioni for Blow Up. 4, I have Richard Brooks for In Cold Blood. 3, I have Stanley Kramer for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. 2, I have Mike Nichols for The Graduate. And number 1, Sergio Leone as my Best Director winner.
It's a solid whistle you got on there.
I just hope it didn't spike the audio.
It's the it's the sound for my text
notification.
It's my notifications.
So let me ask you, Tom. I'm not here to talk down to Sergio, who's on the great directors pantheon. Do you have any issue with the fact that there's 2 other Dollars films that sort of like he's not taking like a massive leap in directorial effort from the other 2 films he's made in this trilogy? I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate. Like, do you think The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is so directorially superior to everything else?
No, I think he has equal weight in Once Upon a Time in the West, but he was just really good at making certain films, and he stuck to a genre and he made them exquisitely well. Like, Steven Spielberg has not really operated too much outside of his wheelhouse when he really makes a great film. It's either really high concept, well-made action set piece movies like Jaws or Jurassic Park or even E.T. and Raiders, or he's making period dramas with a lot of emotional heft to them, Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. Like, let's not discredit directors for staying within their wheelhouse and knowing what movies they're good at making. Scorsese does the same thing for the most part. Like, I think you can definitely tell when a Scorsese movie is done based on the directorial tone and the aesthetic that he does, but also the subject material. Just because Leone stuck to, for the most part, Westerns and didn't make a ton of movies doesn't make him any less good. Not everybody is Stanley Kubrick.
Well, you can say the same for Ron Howard. You can say the same for Brian De Palma. I mean, films that they did had a certain style. It's kind of like a band almost, which is there's certain, styles that each band has. And when
Chris
they
Nolan is
deviate,
the same thing.
Yeah.
It's going to be high concept, big set pieces that are like really well made, and the plot is not going to be told in a linear fashion.
And when you talk about it, you're talking to a guy who hosts the show where the top film on their list is The Dark Knight, which is the middle of a 3-part trilogy.
Yeah, so I have no problem with it.
Now, like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate because he's basically making 3 very similar movies with same characters, that kind of thing. So you're taking sort of incremental steps to a spot. That's, like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
If somebody wants to come at me on Twitter or whatever else, at GMOAT Podcast, or for that matter, at TJ3 Duncan on my social platforms, come at me.
You're not going to hear any flack from me. As you can see, if you're watching this, there's a giant poster of Clint and the iconic Man with No Name behind me. So I'm a Leone fan. I'm just, like I said, I'm just throwing it out there. All right. Let's get to my nominations, then we'll round it off with Dana. So my 5 nominations for Best Director are Arthur Penn for Bonnie and Clyde, Sergio Leone for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Jean-Pierre Melville for Le Samurai, Jacques Tati for Playtime,
And that one was not eligible for this year.
and
I knew
Jean-Luc
that's where I was going to
Godard.
trip you up.
No. So just because Playtime came out in December of 67, we play a little fast and loose with the rules here compared to the actual Academy, and it's very much a 1967 movie in my eyes. So Jacques Tati is staying in my nominations, regardless of whatever kind of silly rules they decided to do in 1967.
Yes, fast and
Well,
loose.
I did not include it, but I will say I
Kinda
did
like
watch it
diarrhea.
again, and it's much better the second time.
That's good to hear. Okay.
Fast and
my-
loose
my-
like diarrhea.
And my 5th nominee was Jean-Luc Godard for Weekend, surprisingly, probably to Tom.
Jesus. Here it goes. Here we go.
All right. Well, I think that my 5 kind of highlights what I talked about at the very start of this, which is this was a very European-dominated year for filmmaking, and I think a lot of those directors were pushing the boundaries. I'm going to do something right now for the first time that I've never done on the show, which is I'm going to give my Best Director win to a movie that's not even going to get Best Picture nominated. And that feels counterintuitive to say that. However, Jacques Tati's Playtime is entirely a directorial masterpiece. I'm going to get 0% of the vote. I'm okay with that.
No, you'll get the Cinebro fan club coming out for that movie. You're not going to get 0.
I don't know if the Cinewoke are that woke to Playtime yet, but I guess we'll find out.
You're going to get 20%. I'm calling my shot.
When you watch that movie, there's so much choreography and intricacy to every single frame and every single section of that movie, and there's some really long extended cuts that movie is fascinating to watch every time, and you can just like pick out random people in any scene and just follow them. And I don't know how Tati pulled off all of the choreography of what happens in that movie. And like I said, it's not a movie that's plot driven really in any sort of way, so it's not like one of the great pictures, but from a directorial standpoint, it's one of the great directorial efforts to me.
I can't really argue against you as far as a technical mastery, production design, all the sound effects and different things that had to go into the movie. I don't particularly care for the fact that it doesn't really have any plot or, for that matter, really much dialogue at all. But as far as a directorial, I'm not going to give you too much crap on that because, like I said, the second time around when my expectations were lowered because I knew it had no real plot or dialogue and I wasn't trying to look for it, it made a lot more sense to me.
I also love that one of the cool things about that movie is Tati built all of those sets. Those are like built from the ground up sets, and he sort of did the Francis Ford Coppola way before. He basically invested all of his money into that film. That's very much his production. I like the attitude of what he did and just like taking it, calling his shot and going for it. And so, yeah, like I said, I don't care that I'm going to lose this vote. If I'm picking with my heart, it's probably Sergio Leone for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is just one of my favorite movies of all time. But I just think, like, objectively, Tati's doing a lot of cool stuff in that movie, so I'm going to go that way. Dana, what about you? Why don't you give us your directors who are nominated and who's going to win?
I have Mike Nichols for The Graduate, Stanley Kramer for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Richard Brooks for In Cold Blood, Norman Jewison for In the Heat of the Night, and I have Sergio Leone for Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And I have Sergio Leone.
Why was that the best directorial effort over the other 4 directors for you, Dana?
I think the film captured the whole. It's going to sound strange how an Italian making a film with 3 Americans speaking English and the rest of the cast speaking Italian, set in the American West, captures the colliding forces of American culture. I think that literally in 1967, we had the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that film portrays where American society was going to go. And unfortunately, I think what ended up becoming clear was 1968 thereafter became the bad and the ugly. And we almost spun out of control. And I think so that for more reasons than I would care to admit was visionary. And so that's why I went with it, because I think it was his idea to take this in this direction and to show exactly where this was going and what he perceived as being a cultural touchstone. And so I just think longevity and in the moment both favor it over the other 4 nominees in my category.
I think it has the most universal themes of any of the movies that we pretty much have. I mean, I'll reserve a few of the comments overall for when we get to Best Picture, because I figure by this point that I've nominated 3 things already for the film, it's going to be hard for people to really predict where I'm going with my Best Picture winner. But the point being, if you really, and we've said it before on multiple episodes for God tier something or other, and we said it for Steven Spielberg with the creation of the D-Day scene from Saving Private Ryan. The last 15 minutes of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is about as close to pure directorial perfection as you're going to get.
And in retrospect, and I'll throw this out as partly for trivia, Mike Nichols got the win, and I think it was makeup for the previous year. Because I think Mike
prior.
Huh?
It was 2 years prior.
I thought it was the year before was Who's Afraid? 66? That's what I found when I was looking.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's listed as 1966.
I mean, to be honest, because who won it that year was Fred Zinnemann for A Man for All Seasons, and I thought by far Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was the better film and the better directorial effort.
Boy, that'd be a really tough one because I love both films.
I think the Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was much more a directorial masterpiece.
I think I would tend to agree with you that Nichols is probably the better directorial effort in that particular year, but I think overall Man for All Seasons might be the better movie to me, and I know that might be controversial.
Yes, that might be very well the case, but there we're talking about a script and the acting and everything, all aspects, but from a directorial point of view, I think it was a makeup. By the way, Mike Nichols got to direct Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf based on the fact that he won a Tony for his work on Broadway.
He won multiple Tonys.
I know, but the first Tony he won was for what play?
You're kind of stepping on me a little bit here, but I'm pretty sure it's Barefoot in the Park.
He was in that, but he didn't win a Tony for it.
I was pretty sure that he won the Tony for it as like the breakout director.
Nope, his first Tony was for a different play.
Then I'm going to go with The Odd Couple.
That is correct.
Another
And
great
who was in
GMOAT
the
episode.
who was Yes, and who was Felix and Oscar in the original
So
play of The
Matthau
Odd
was
Couple?
Oscar Madison, but
Yes.
was it Tony Randall was Felix?
No,
Oh no, you're right. It was Art Carney.
Art Carney was the original Tony or Felix Unger
Felix
on Broadway.
Unger.
All right, well, you guys both had Nichols in your 5. I'll say he was my 6, just outside the line. I think that's a good win. I don't have a problem with Nichols winning in this particular
No,
category.
I don't either, really.
Yeah, it's a solid win. Any other directors that in the conversation for you?
I don't have as strong opinions on the two that I had at 7 and 6. I had 7 Jean-Pierre Melville for Le Samurai. You already mentioned it. And Norman Jewison, just because I do think that overall the film works, but I kind of knocked him down the more I got into the book that I listened to for the show, just because the amount of influence Hal Ashby had on the editing of the film, he probably got like an asterisk next to that. If Jewison was nominated, Hal Ashby should have probably been nominated alongside of him. I think he did win for editing, though.
What about you, Dana? Any directors that were
I
close to sneaking in?
I guess I'd put Arthur Penn in. I'm just not a big fan of Bonnie and Clyde.
No.
Just did not enjoy the film. Did not see the connection the public made with it, but still, critics loved it. It probably was kind of refreshing at that time. So I guess I would put him basically on the outside looking in.
And none of us have done much favors for Bonnie and Clyde. I think I'm probably the high man of the 3 of us on it, but not by much. It's just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no.
It's not really. I think it's incredibly dated at this point in time.
Yeah. Like I said, if you've seen one QT film or one Brian De Palma film, this looks tame.
Yeah. Very true. Okay, so there's going to be 3 options for the voting poll in this category. We all know what the outcome's going to be, but we'll play the game anyway. You can go with my pick. I've got Jacques Tati for Playtime. Come on, Cinewoke, show up to the vote. You can go with the Academy, who has Mike Nichols and The Graduate, or you can side with both Tom and Dana Duncan, who have Sergio Leone in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Tom, you got another bit of trivia for us
To
before
be
we get
fair,
the picture?
to bring back one of my terms from earlier in the show, cinemasochist, that's what I feel every time I listen to one of your like rankings episodes recapping your monthly watches, and you're like, that had a 3.7. And I'm like, why did you watch it then?
Fair point. Fair point. All right, you got any trivia for us, Tom?
All right. Oh. How many EGOT winners were in the original 1968 nominees? I know this is for the year 1967.
Yeah.
I could name one.
I say maybe 3. If I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say 3.
Mel Brooks
He was not a nominee.
in
Year after.
year after. Okay.
Producers the next year, or you would have watched
All
it.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose I would have.
Yeah. It would have been like the first thing you would have put on.
I was really saddened when I didn't get to watch it for this prep. I even turned it on. And I was like, damn it.
Oh, shucks. But then we gave you the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think it made up for it.
You totally redeemed yourself.
So there were 2. Do you have any guesses at who they were?
None.
Well, the winner of the director award was one, Mike Nichols.
Yes.
And Audrey Hepburn.
Good on Audrey.
What was his Grammy?
I don't remember.
Oh, I can tell you exactly what the Grammy was. It was for Spam-A-Lot.
Oh.
You sure it's not an earlier Grammy award for like one of his comedy albums with Nichols
Might be
and
with
May?
May or the Lane May.
I don't know. But I mean, that's how Mel Brooks won his Grammy. So
I was just watching
1,000-year-old man.
I was watching the Conan O'Brien podcast with Eric Idle today, talking about Spam-A-Lot.
sure.
And they were deep diving into that. All right, let's get to the granddaddy. Let's get to Best Picture, which most people seem to want to fight about most frequently. So the 1967 Best Picture actual lineup was Bonnie and Clyde, Dr. Dolittle, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and the coveted award went to In the Heat of the Night. With this year only allowing 5 Best Picture nominees, we're all going to adhere to those rules. I'll jump in really quickly and do my lineup and then go over to you guys. My 5, I've actually got Bonnie and Clyde. Like I said, I think I'm the high man on Bonnie and Clyde. I've got it in there. I think it's dated a little bit, but I've still
I think I'm
got
actually
it there.
surprised one of us put it in our nominees.
Yeah, I came up on it on the rewatch. I've never really had much appreciation for it, but I did find a little more this time. So I've got it in my 5. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, second choice. No surprise there for anybody who knows me. The Graduate is going to be my 3rd nominee. 4th nominee is going to go to In the Heat of the Night. 5th nominee is going to go to La Samurai. I'm really disappointed I can't have 10 because I think this is actually a year where my 5 that missed the cut, I would have loved to have like a solid 10 for this group, but that's the rules. That's what we do. So this is where I'm going to get completely objective with things. Because if I was playing this from a subjective standpoint, if I was just picking this based on what Andrew thinks is the most fun film to watch or what I just enjoy going back to most frequently, it's obviously The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But I think the best picture of 1967 is indeed The Graduate. I think it captures the generational divide that obviously was very prescient to 1967, but I think is still felt in ways in future generations. I think that it's a movie that is both dated in its time and yet is also kind of timeless in certain aspects. I just think The Graduate is the movie that should best represent the year 1967 when we talk about the Revisionist Almanac, and it's going to get my pick. I don't think it's going to win when inevitably Sergio Leone's Great Western comes up to bat, but I'm going to put in a good word for The Graduate. Dana, let's go over to you. What do you got for your best picture lineup?
I have In the Heat of the Night. I have The Graduate. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And In Cold Blood. I have the winner being The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. For the reasons I outlined for Best Director, which is, I think, I understand your points with The Graduate. I would have been about 3.5, 4 years old during that time frame, but it wasn't that far removed, and I understand the concepts of what was going on. And I remember having those conversations or sitting around the Thanksgiving table when I was a kid and listening to my dad, who was at that time a Goldwater Republican, and my uncle, who was a radical liberal, and yelling at each other, kind of
What
like
do you mean
Archie.
was?
Huh?
He's still a radical liberal.
Well, that's true. And my dad kind of mellowed out as he got older, became a Democrat, which I'm like, I never understood where that came from. But
Maybe
anyway,
he just liked voting for guys who only won one state, Goldwater and Mondale.
Yeah, apparently. Anyway, but it was kind of like listening to All in the Family with Archie and Meathead. But I just think that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has in time and more to say about that confluence of cultures in the United States than The Graduate ever did. I think The Graduate was funny. It was light. It pointed out the cultural divide and the conflict of the divide between. I just don't think it has much to do with what ultimately became the mental and cultural result of that time frame that I think culminated ultimately in Watergate and the end of the Vietnam War.
What would be your number 2 if you didn't have The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? Is it In the Heat of the Night, or is it something else in your 5? Like what's fighting for it?
I think that In the Heat of the Night pointed out to a large portion of American culture or American society what exactly was going on in the Deep South, especially for northern urban audiences that had only kind of hinted at it, So I would probably say In the Heat of the Night. In fact, I had to pick that as my number one for a while, and I changed it earlier this afternoon to go with GBU.
We already know what you're going to pick, but why don't you do the formality? Give us your other 4 nominees, and we'll go from there.
So, as I traditionally do, I will rank these as the Oscars should. I have number 5, In Cold Blood, number 4, The Graduate, 3, In the Heat of the Night, 2, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and number 1, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Anything additional you need to say about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that you haven't said on any of the other categories, why it's the best film of 67?
You're marrying Hitchcockian suspense with John Ford level camera work and high level acting with possibly a top 5 score of all time. And I think it's the one that's lasted the longest because it has the most universal themes: greed, good-natured representation, kindness to our enemies at times, that violence does not necessarily solve all of our problems, but money found is sweeter than money earned. I mean, there's a lot of things to the film. And again, I return. It's one of the few things. I am not a guy that will like search YouTube clips, but the last 15 minutes of this movie, it's outstanding.
I was a little bit in the director category, Tom. You kind of threw a curveball at me with La Samurai coming up. I did not know if you had gotten around to that or where you stood on it. And then you
It seemed
dropped
like
it in
the most
director.
important one for me to watch for you. So yes, I
So
got
what
to
did
it.
you?
I think it was
What
like
did
the
you think of
fourth
it?
film I watched.
Okay.
I thought it was fine. I thought it was a little too subtle and a little too stunted for my taste. Maybe that's having watched more modern films that do a lot of this same type of thing, and I thought doing it better. Personally, and I know this is going to kill you, but I think Fincher's The Killer from last year was a better version of this to me. But
Yeah, I don't hate it. So what was your guys' 6 that just missed out? For me, my 6 was going to be Cool Hand Luke. It was kind of on the bubble.
I had Cool Hand Luke at 7. I have To Serve with Love at 8. I had La Samurai at 6.
That was why I asked. I was like, maybe it's going to sneak in over In Cold Blood.
I had To Serve with Love as my 6th.
You guys were both higher than I was on that one.
Like I said, it may just have been the time, because I think sometimes when you're watching a film, and you almost need to watch films several times over different periods of time to really come to a complete understanding of your feelings or opinions of a film, because sometimes it just emotionally hits you at a particular moment in time that differs.
Do we have any listener questions on Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
We do not.
Since I didn't look at them. Okay. So then let me stand on a small soapbox here for Stanley Kramer in this movie. I know for the most part, people are going to say this is like cultural appropriation and lily white racism packaged up into a really neat box. And the film at the time, even though it was immensely popular, was undercut by the fact that basically the Supreme Court outlawed everything that this movie was trying to push against at the time to begin with. But in an era where this is so commonplace, and yet I think the biggest takeaway for me, and part of Stanley Kramer's reason for doing this, is making old, principled liberals have to live out their principles. And no more is that like a concept than right now. Let's make old white liberals live out their principles in a Trump America.
Yeah. Nothing to add to the conversation there. Thank you for getting on your soapbox, Tom.
You're welcome.
Again, TJ3 at
TJ3 Duncan.
Okay. 3 options people are going to have for Best Picture. A solid 3. I think the vote will be semi-mixed on these 3. I'm happy with what we got here. So you can go with my pick. I've got The Graduate. You can go with The Academy, who has In the Heat of the Night. Or you can side with Tom and Dana, who are once again together for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay. Listener
Have
questions.
you ever had anyone give 4 categories to one movie yet?
I
think this is a first.
It might be a first. I always do all of my sort of deep statistical dives after the fact. I usually try to spread the wealth, but there might have been someone in there somewhere. But I'll get back to you on that, Tom.
Well, I just did it, so I'm just saying. But
you may be the first. You tend to be a trailblazer in this season for various different things. So
that's right,
you
folks.
You didn't look at any of the listener questions I sent you beforehand.
No, I like my initial reaction, so they're less prepared.
Okay. Dana, did you do any sort of preparation, or are you just going to take these on the fly?
I did some prep. Yes, I went through them and kind of thought through and prepared some answers. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive into them. So the first one up we have is from Adam Freed, friend of both of our shows over at moviearcher.com. His question to us was, what 1967 film best reflected the anti-establishment American sensibility of the time? I'm just going to say Bonnie and Clyde, I think, caught that moment.
I think that at the time would have been the easy answer, but I'm going to say The Graduate.
I thought about this long and hard, and I thought about different things. And I'm gonna explain my answer. Okay, that time frame, there was an anti-establishment movement or sensibility, but most of Americans wanted it to be within a certain confine. They didn't want to go so far as to just blow up. They weren't anarchists. They wanted to do it within the certain parameters. So I go with the Dirty Dozen because it's anti-heroes throughout, except that they're within the confines of the U.S. military, led by a certain group of people who were anti-establishment kind of on their own, but did it within the confines of a traditional society.
Next question up we got is from another friend of the show, Seth Vargas, over at Movie Friends Podcast. His question to us is the slap from In the Heat of the Night the best of all time? In parentheses, he said yes. Best slap in cinematic
Unless
history?
you're counting Will Smith's at the Oscars, yes.
Dana, what do you think?
I have 2 slaps that I like, and I would rate close.
Okay.
The Godfather, and then
What's
the Maltese.
slap in The Godfather?
It's the where he's slapping the singer about being a man.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. Because really that's the conveyance of being a man versus being, a child type of thing, growing up and taking responsibility for yourself and your actions. And the other is the Maltese Falcon with Bogart slapping
Mary Astor?
No.
Peter Lorre?
Peter Lorre.
Okay. I pulled
but I
a
would
couple
also
of
put
slaps.
There Would Be Blood, Full Metal Jacket, and Whiplash.
There's a lot of slapping in Whiplash.
Yes. Okay. I was trying to think, where was the slap? And yeah, when he's, are you rushing or dragging?
Yeah.
So you do know the fucking difference.
I went.
Yep.
I flipped the genders. I thought there's some pretty good female slaps out there. Cher and Moonstruck is sort of one of the more famous slaps.
Yep, I did. Think of that one. Yes.
And then recently, we've already talked about Poor Things, but Emma Stone, and it's really the reaction of Mark Ruffalo's character and the way he takes that slap that I just enjoy that one quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right. Next question's from friend Kat over at Veg Out on Instagram. Kat's question to us is, what is the most underrated film of 1967? What do you guys think? Underrated.
GBU.
Is underrated?
I think.
Interesting. Okay.
When you look at a lot of people's lists and things and discussions and critics and such, but it's a limited view for cinemaphiles.
No, I disagree. I think it's pretty high on a lot of critical lists. It's often ranked among the top westerns, if not the top western. I mean, QT's out on a limb trying to stump for it everywhere he can. So I don't know if I buy that one. But I'll go with one of the sentimental favorites of the evening. I'll go To Sir with Love. I was not sure what to expect out of that movie, and I found it very endearing.
But the two for me, they're both on Criterion, so there's underrated's kind of a subjective term. I would say they're underrated amongst general audiences. The cinephiles know what's up. In Cold Blood is incredible and doesn't get talked about enough. And then La Samurai. I just think those are two really great films from 1967 that not enough people are familiar with day to day.
I
All right.
would add Wait Until Dark, because like I said, I started that and I really am anxious to go back and finish it because I was really into that film.
That was one of my favorite first time watches for this particular episode. I had a great time, Dana. I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought, what in the hell is this thing with Audrey Hepburn playing this? I don't know. I was suspect going in, loved what I saw coming out. Okay. Next question is from our friend Sarah Shea over at Shea Cinema. She asked us just a general question. Who would win in a battle between Son of Godzilla and Son of Kong? The reason for her question is Son of Godzilla came out in 1967 and Son of Kong came out in 1933, and I just happened to be on an episode with her and her father William for King Kong, also from 1933. So really it's a question of, are you a Godzilla fan or are you a King Kong fan? Which way do you fall?
I think Godzilla's bigger and breathes fire, but I'm going to default on this answer and say whatever one Sarah picks is probably right.
I'm gonna go with Son of Kong simply because he has longer arms.
It's true. I'm a Godzilla over Kong person in general, so I'll put my hat in the race for Son of Godzilla to breathe some fire, or maybe he's got some of that like nuclear lightning energy or whatever the hell Godzilla's got going on. Okay, another question from Sarah. She asked us which film from 1967 would we choose as our guilty pleasure? She said it's not worthy of being in the Almanac in any capacity, but it's something we absolutely enjoyed. I'll say mine is Valley of the Dolls. I didn't mention it at all today, but it was.
Boy,
I had a
you
decent
really
time
like
with
to
Valley of the
dwell
Dolls.
in the depression movies, don't you?
It's where I get my comfort.
Okay. As a Bond fan, it's You Only Live Twice. Like, it's not a great cinematic film, but they're enjoyable. They're stupid fun. They're formulaic, but I can put them on and take a nap if I really want to, or I can watch them and not have to think.
It's a good answer, Tom.
I will go with two that are more outside of the categories, which is one being El Dorado, which it's kind of like, I mean, Rio Bravo's probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite Western.
It's not even worthy of being called Rio Bravo Light.
I know, but it's still, if it's on, I'll watch it. No, I had not seen it because I was kind of thinking it was a complete ripoff of Rio Bravo.
Down to the sets.
But, and You Only Live Twice, as Tom said, same thing with Bond. But ultimately, again, even though it's been mentioned and we had some nominations from it, it's The Dirty Dozen. I could watch that film 2 or 3 times a year, and all it'll do is bring back days of sitting in my house in Beloit, my dad on the sofa sitting there in his t-shirt and jockey shorts, drinking a Diet Coke, and me watching it sitting in the rocking chair, usually with my cat sleeping on my stomach, watching this film. It seemed like we did that like 3 times a year, every year throughout my childhood. And so that's always going to be a guilty pleasure and a long time memory.
Okay, next question is from another friend of the show, Kevin Scanlon, over on Instagram. His question to us is, he said, for someone like me who has only seen 3 movies from the list of 1967 movies he was looking at, those being The Graduate, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Wait Until Dark. Those are the only 3 he has seen. What 3 would we recommend he checks out based on our prep? So he's seen GBU, The Graduate, and Wait Until Dark. So, Tom, what 3 are you going to tell Kevin he needs to check out?
I think for completionist, usually the Best Picture winner is a place to start. Like, there's nothing wrong with In the Heat of the Night as far as just a movie quality. It's definitely enjoyable. What were the 3? So, The Graduate, Wait Until Dark. I would say In Cold Blood is probably one I would put up there on a must watch. And then again, for a completionist's sake, probably Cool Hand Luke of the ones he probably should watch.
What about you, Dana?
Having a day that you feel down and that life is dark and things aren't going the way you want, To Sir with Love. I think that that's such an upbeat and inspiring film. It's worth watching. And if you want a film and you're going into it thinking, I want to watch a piece of garbage and think this is hilarious because it's so bad, The Born Losers.
I don't know if you talked them into it. Well, Kevin, if you're listening, check out The Born Losers and let Dana know specifically what you think. I'll say kind of like Tom said, for just like a completionist's sake, if you want to get into stuff, I'd say In the Heat of the Night's a must. You got to check out what won Best Picture that year. Bonnie and Clyde, just for the sake of kind of cultural impact in that particular time. And then again, I've already mentioned it, La Samurai. I just think it's one of those underrated movies everybody should check out. It's obviously had influence on a lot of stuff. Okay. We're going to turn it over to the question queen, Heather Stewart. She's going to be on the show next month. And so hopefully everyone who's listened and every guest who's been a part of season 1 that's taken infinite numbers of questions from Heather, please send her as many back so she can get her comeuppance on the questions in turn.
And you don't mean me. I'm just making that very clear. I am no longer submitting any questions to this show.
Correct. We have crossed that bridge. Yes, that's right. Okay. Heather's question for us is, she said she just finished listening to In Session Films episode about true crime movies. They had In Cold Blood near the top. Would we agree? And what are some of our favorite true crime films? I think we'd all agree In Cold Blood is a true crime great and in the conversation based on what we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, but that's only a little bit by default because, like, I can't think of a lot of true crime. Like, if it's actually based, like, there are a lot of great crime films, but true crime that's actually based on something, that's going to be more limited. I mean, a few of the ones that I really enjoy, so Spotlight, All the President's Men, The Wolf of Wall Street, to a degree, maybe like an I, Tonya, but you're starting to stretch a little bit by the time you get down the list.
Okay.
Zodiac.
Oh, sure.
On my list.
And the Boston Strangler with Tony Curtis.
Never
from the
seen
50s. Or late
I'm glad you
mid 60s.
Okay, I'm glad you called Zodiac out. That was definitely one that I think gets overlooked a lot. Badlands, Terrence Malick's 1970s Badlands is definitely a really good true crime about a couple serial killer. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my favorite movie of all time, Goodfellas, which is very much a true crime film, right there front and center. So those would be mine.
Anybody going to nominate The Apprentice?
Watching that movie on election day was the worst idea of my entire life.
Yeah.
Okay, Heather's back once again with a question. She said, who is the best Dr. Dolittle? Is it Rex Harrison from 1967? Is it Eddie Murphy from 1998? Or is it Robert Downey Jr. from 2020?
And with that subsidiary is what's the best double wide at the mobile home park?
Who's the smartest Kardashian?
I just said, can we throw them all in the trash? I mean, like, I don't want to talk about Dr. Dolittle.
I haven't seen a single one of these, Heather, intentionally. Like, I've stayed as far as possible away from them. I like Robert Downey and I like Eddie Murphy. If I have to default, I think Eddie Murphy is funnier, but it depends on what type of movie you're making.
I don't know.
If it's for kids, probably not Eddie Murphy, because most of the times when Eddie's actually being funny, it's not stuff for children.
True.
Very, very true. I would just say I never want to think about Dr. Dolittle again after prep this time, and so get all three of those performances in the trash.
I will say I would love to see Eddie Murphy's Dolomite version of Dr. Dolittle.
He's so good in Dolomite. So good. All right. This one is a much deeper question that Heather sent us. I'm intrigued to see what comes out of this one. She said, who would we cast in the Ben, Elaine, and Mrs. Robinson roles in The Graduate if this was being made today? She said Gen Z Twitter would surely cast Tom Holland and Zendaya. What do you guys think? Who are you casting in the the roles of The Graduate today?
I
have
like
my three.
Zendaya, but Tom Holland does not have the acting ability to pull off the Dustin Hoffman role. It just, no. So, boy, that's
I have
tough.
my three.
Okay, you want to think on it, Tom?
Yeah, I'll need a second.
Michael Cera, Lily Collins,
He's too
and
old to play
Diana
it now.
Lane.
Ooh, Diane Lane. That's a great choice. Who'd you say, Lily Collins for Elaine?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I had Timothy Chalamet for Ben at one point, and then I thought, Michael Cera because of the shock value.
So Tom, I'll let you can keep thinking on it if you want. I'll throw out some of mine. I did bounce this question off a bunch of our friends just to kind of get some ideas because there's a lot of
Okay.
answers out there. So one of the things that came up, Kieran B over at Best Picture Cast, he suggested Maya Hawke, who is also one of the actresses that came to mind first for me for Elaine. And he said if you're going to do Maya Hawke, you also have to have Uma Thurman playing Mrs. Robinson, which I thought was kind of a cool idea that you've got, mother-daughter playing an actual mother-daughter role. And then another friend of the show, Britt over at 1001 by One. I think she gave the answer I prefer for Mrs. Robinson, and it's Demi Moore, who's fresh off The Substance this year. I think Demi Moore would be a really compelling. Though Diane Lane's a good choice, Dana. That you kind of swayed me on that one. If I'm picking though, after I sort of talk to everybody, if I'm picking the roles, I'm gonna say I like Demi Moore and Mrs. Robinson. I'm going with Britt there. I'm leaning towards Anya Taylor-Joy for Elaine. I think that she has the qualities, especially the way she was in Queen's Gambit. If you happen to see that Netflix show, I think she can pull off that character. The hardest one for me is Ben, the Dustin Hoffman role. I just don't think there's a lot of good young male actors. I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit, and I'm going to say if you could get a young Daniel Radcliffe, like post Harry Potter, obviously, but still a younger Daniel Radcliffe, or a post Social Network Andrew Garfield, I think he would have been really dynamic in that role. So those would be my two picks.
Okay.
It's a tough one. I'm with you.
Yeah,
Tom Holland would not work.
I mean, if you keep it Zendaya, I'm trying to think of who the right mom would necessarily be. Like Regina King is that's
that'd be a good one.
Wheelhouse. Maybe like a Kerry Washington, I think could do it well.
I like where you're going.
I mean, as far as like if you were gonna go all male black cast, I don't know. I mean,
like John Boyega,
like Lakeith Stanfield could actually do it, or for that matter, why am I drawing a blank? Donald Glover.
Donald Glover is a very inspired choice. I like that.
Yeah, do it all black. Do it like the first one I had in mind was like Angela Bassett for Zendaya's mom, but I think she might be a little too old now. But yeah, like Kerry Washington, Zendaya, and Donald Glover. I think that actually makes a lot of sense.
I dig it. Okay, and as a follow-up to this question, we have another one from Sarah Shea, who asked us, okay, we're in the remake world of The Graduate. Which artist would we like to have remake the song Mrs. Robinson for a new Graduate movie?
Plain White Tees.
Since I love The Sound of Silence by Disturbed, I'll go with them.
He definitely has the voice to pull it off. I'm going to go, just because they're in the moment right now, I'm going to say Oasis. I want to see what in the world Oasis would do with Mrs. Robinson. I don't know.
Sure, why not?
Okay. Next question is from Chauncey Talese, good buddy of the show. He's got a butterfly effect question. Now, Tom, I know you had kind of hinted way back when that we were going to maybe talk about the butterfly effect a little bit, I think. So this might be up your alley.
Okay.
Chauncey's question was, what's the butterfly effect if Paul Newman or Dustin Hoffman had won the Best Actor award in 1967?
To be quite honest, I don't think it does anything if Paul Newman or not, if Dustin Hoffman wins it, other than maybe it reduces his chances for Rain Man. But I still think he's getting his Oscar for Kramer versus Kramer, and he's still getting nominated for a bunch of stuff, but it's more kicking off of his career, as opposed to Paul Newman's definitely not winning for The Color of Money. Like, that's not happening. I don't know who's winning necessarily that year. I'm looking at it right now. Like, God help us if James Woods ever won an Oscar, but
That was my first thought when I looked at the nominees that year.
it's probably William Hurt winning his second one. But I mean,
Yeah.
Paul Newman had such a donut for ever and ever, and for him to get off the snide and win it for a sequel to a character he'd already played for a bottom 5 Scorsese movie, fine, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this would have been a much more deserving win for Paul Newman, but I think he also had other roles that could have just as equally gotten it.
Now, do you think there's any sort of butterfly effect if Hoffman or Newman wins?
The only thing I could say is if Hoffman wins, he's probably not doing. He's not Razzo Rizzo.
Oh no, I think that more enforces it. This is a guy that like retreated within himself because he became a sex symbol overnight. Like he got to the point of being why am I drawing a blank on Fonzie?
Henry Winkler.
Oh, Henry
He got to
Winkler.
the point of like Henry Winkler status where they were like flipping cars over to get to him. And I don't think he handled it well, which is why he wanted to go so against type and play somebody so dirty and dingy. He's always been more comfortable in doing like stage acting performances, ones that require more choices and daring choices than necessarily the more pretty boy stuff. And even though The Graduate is kind of against the grain of film at that time, it still is probably his most normal role outside of maybe like Kramer versus Kramer is more basic lead performance.
You definitely stole my thunder, Tom, but I'm right with you on. I think if Newman won this year, he's definitely not winning for Color of Money. That's just not happening. We're very much in line there. I think William Hurt probably would have won for Children of a Lesser God, which I'm a big fan of. If Hoffman wins, I think Hoffman still wins Kramer versus Kramer, but I actually think there's a chance if we assume he still does every film in his career, Rain Man might actually be one that campaign went towards Tom Cruise instead, possibly.
Yeah.
I think Tom Cruise, in my mind, deserved a. I may be tipping my hand to that particular year, but I think Tom Cruise should have been in line for a Best Actor nomination that year. I think he's every bit as good as Hoffman.
I think he's the better performance and the more difficult performance, to be quite honest. Hoffman's the more showy performance, but I think Cruise is the actual heartbeat of the film and the audience avatar.
Yeah, so if Hoffman's already got 2 at that point, I feel like there's a chance maybe Cruise got pushed up a little. I don't know, but great question by Chauncey. I
Based
do
in
love that.
supporting actor instead of lead.
Right. Okay, next question's from good buddy, guest on the show last month, Mike over at Cinemusts. His question is Mrs. Robinson actually the hero of The Graduate?
No, Mike. No one's the hero. There is no hero. That's the whole point.
At a time when women's lib became huge and Gloria Steinem and, on and on, I can see it.
I think she's the more relatable character the older you get. Like, most of us more feel or identify with her, but she's not the hero.
Well, it depends on your definition of a hero, because ultimately she fulfilled her desires at a time when urban housewives did not.
But she got almost nothing out of it, and she just continued doing it because she didn't know what else to do with her life. I look at her as tragic, and that's not heroic.
Okay.
Yeah, the note I wrote down was I don't see anyone in that particular film being anything other than gray. I think they all operate in the gray of what most of humanity operates in. So I had never thought of her as a hero. So that was an interesting question from Mike to maybe, make me think of something a little differently.
It sounds
but
like
I
a very
definitely feel
Mike
like
question.
Well, let's throw another Mike question at you then. His other question
is it about Hamlet?
It is not.
Okay.
But it is still Graduate related. His question is, who's one musical artist whose work you're okay being the ambiance for your life? I'll throw mine out. Okay, what do you got, Dana?
Well, go ahead.
Okay, on a good day, it's the Beatles. On a good day, it's the Beatles.
Yeah.
On a bad day, like all of last week, it's Rage Against the Machine.
I have 2. Bruce Springsteen or the Eagles. As long as it's not Heartache Tonight.
Fair enough. I'm going to go
Hate
with
that
John
song.
Williams.
Okay. It's a good answer, Tom. All right. Next question is from a diehard listener of the show, Pierre J. Dupont on Twitter. And he asked us,
Hello, Pierre.
Yes, Pierre. Does Mouchette encapsulate Bresson's despair-fueled vibe? To
Wouldn't
either
know,
of you
don't
who
care.
did not,
Huh?
this is like the Dogma 95 question of
Yes, it
past
is.
episode, Tom.
Is this like the subreddit? It's like
Okay.
so deep that nobody bothers to read down that far on the list, or what? I mean, I
Um,
have no clue what he's talking about.
so Robert Bresson, who's the director of Mouchette, is well known for all of his film work being very tragic in nature. I personally don't view Mouchette as his most tragic. I think I'm going to be doing an episode here in a couple of months on 1956, in which I'll be talking about one of his more famous works called A Man Escaped. I think that's the movie that I most think of when I think of Bresson, but he's also got Pickpocket, Balthazar, and Diary of a Country Priest, which is a pretty dark one that I just watched for prep of a different show a few months back. So I don't know if I would pick Mouchette, Pierre, but thank you for your question. Definitely, if Tom, Dana, if you're ever in the mood to be happy, don't watch a Bresson film. I'll tell you that.
Noted.
Okay.
And we're going to close with one final question from Mike over at Cinemust. Between the three of us, Tom, Dana, and Andrew, who's the good, who's the bad, and who's the ugly?
I don't know about the other two roles, but I'm definitely the ugly.
Dana, what did you write down? I'm eager to hear your answer.
I have no idea. It depends on the day of the week. I mean, I thrive in each of the three roles. I mean, I was commenting about my negotiations and how much of a dick I can be sometimes, and I
And how
love
much you
that.
revel in that.
Oh yeah, and how I ultimately want to be the the do-gooder, but the other part of me is that sometimes I just like to be kind of the troll under the bridge, as one of my closest friends refers to me.
Yeah. I only say that I'm the ugly because I'm the comedic relief of this entire endeavor. So
I thought about this very, very carefully, and I will say, Dana, you are the good. And I mean this from a personal standpoint because I know personally, Dana, you've been fighting the good fight in your daily life as a lawyer for decades. You help people that can't help themselves, and I really appreciate that attribute in you. So you're definitely the good amongst the three of us, without question.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm definitely the bad because number one, I just like comparing myself to Lee Von Cleef, who I think is a really cool character. But also, I like to play instigator, as you'll notice on the Fight Club episode of GMOAT Podcast, which is up at the point of this recording, because I can definitely do some bad things, especially when I've been drinking. And then Tom, you are the ugly, but please know I
yes.
mean that with love, because you might not be on every episode, much like Eli Wallach isn't in the entire Dollars trilogy, but when you appear, you damn well steal the show.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. That does it for the listener questions. Thank you to everybody that sent them. These questions keep growing every single month. I feel like I'm going to have to do like a separate episode on listener questions at a certain point because they just keep extending, but definitely appreciate them. That's going to do it for this recording, but this is only the beginning. Our picks have been made. It's going to be ultimately up to you, the fans, to decide what goes into the Almanac as the true winners. We're going to be putting up social media polls across all 4 social media platforms in the coming days, and we need your votes to be cast. Remember, the more places you follow the page, the more opportunities you have to vote. Now, before we sign off, let's talk about what's on the way to close out 2024 and maybe start 2025. So, Tom, this episode is going to go up Friday, December 6th. What do you and Dana have on the way for Greatest Movie of All Time podcast?
Well, I believe at this point in time, if memory serves me correctly, although I could pull up our upcoming schedule, but I think these are basically in line for our last 2 to maybe 3 films of the year. If memory serves, Up in the Air, Magnolia, and a revisit of In the Heat of the Night are on the way before Christmas, and then we take our yearly break over the Christmas holiday for 1 week before we come back and start our journey through season 6 exploring the years that end in 5s and 0s for all the anniversaries, starting with Barry Lyndon, leading off, as we will be re-exploring at least a couple of them. For 1975, all the Best Picture winners will be on tap next year, but that is not all. We have Gladiator, we have the original OG Star Wars trilogy, we have all 3 of the first Toy Story movies. We have a bunch of stuff on tap for next year, so stay tuned.
I'm very excited for what's coming from you guys over at GMOAT. I'll be joining you guys in 2025 for Barry Lyndon and Empire Strikes Back, which should be really fun episodes, and hopefully there's a little less tension than we had on our previous episode.
I don't know about Lyndon because I've never seen it. I have no idea what to expect in that one. Sarah Shea will be on with us, so that adds a completely unknown element to it. But I have to imagine Empire Strikes Back is going to be us fawning over ourselves over who gets the right to give the first 10.
Yes, probably. All right, and you can look out for the upcoming first episode of Season 2 in January, where I'm going to be joined by Chicago film critic Adam Freed from MovieArcher.com and the question queen herself, Heather Stewart. We're going to be covering the year 2016, which is the infamous year that the Best Picture was read wrong and Moonlight took down La La Land. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Threads, TikTok, and most recently Blue Sky at the handle Rev Almanac. There's going to be timestamps on each category in case you need to go back and listen to a certain part again as you think about your vote, as well as links to Tom and Dana's GMOAT podcast in the episode description. And while I have you, this officially concludes season 1 of the show. That's right, a full year in the books, 12 episodes, hundreds, what felt like thousands of watches later. We can close the book on what was a more successful year than I ever could have imagined. Now, Tom, I promised you a little bit of a surprise, and I'm going to take a moment if you'll indulge me in that surprise.
Do I have a choice?
You do not have a choice. All right. So when I was planning this season, I originally had you set for 2-episode guest appearances, which you were more than willing to help with. Over the course of the season, an unexpected situation came up that threw a little monkey wrench in my plans, and I had to pivot on the fly. In the end, it all worked out,
Artie
but the
B,
only
no, it's
reason...
your fault.
It's always Artie's fault. But seriously, in the end, it all worked out, and the main reason it did is because of you, Tom. Out of the goodness of your heart, you're a great friend, and you stepped up and picked up 3 additional guest spots, along with Dana taking time to come aboard 2 spots he wasn't originally scheduled for. I know you've got a ton going on in your life with law school, you got a full-time job, a boss here who drives you crazy, a weekly podcast of your own to prep, edit, etc. I just want to give you your flowers right now. Thanks for everything you did for me this year, both on the show, behind the scenes. From me to you, Tom, you're a good man, Charlie Brown. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, but I reciprocate those sentiments. Andrew, I consider you a very great friend, and I'm glad to help out my friends where I can. So at times, yes, it became a labor of love, but even so, did I do some of it for selfish reasons to give myself something to do? Yes. Has it become more difficult with the additional things that I've added into my life for priority's sake and what I want to accomplish with my life? Yes. Will I be on less episodes? You can start your cheers now, folks. But yes, that will be the case. But even so, I was glad to help you out and in the process be a part of the conversation. And I know I do a lot of things very tongue-in-cheek on this show and kind of play the jester of sorts, but sincerely, I do appreciate that whatever connected us in some way, that we've had a very good relationship this year, and I can consider you a very dear friend.
Likewise, to you both. Dana, it's been a pleasure getting to know you so well over the year. Thank you so much for taking part in 2 different episodes this year. A lot of work I know goes into it. And we're wrapping up the season, so I just want to thank everybody that took time to feature on this first season. So Kieran B, Joey R, Grant Z, 3 members of Best Picture Cast, each crushed it on their appearances. Joey R again with Adam St. John and Britt Reinholds Hobson, the holy trinity of podcasting over at 1001 by 1. They're the best fucking friends forever. Mike Emmel over at Cinemusts. He's one of the most genuine people, not just in the podcasting space. He's a great dude, and you should definitely check out his show. And last but certainly not least, VP Morris. She's an author extraordinaire. She's a brilliant writer, a brilliant podcaster, and she always brings a hot take that's going to melt film bro minds on social media. And if you enjoyed Tom and Dana being on the show, you are in luck. As we already mentioned, they're going to be back in season 2 for 1982 later in 2025. But that's going to do it for this episode. I am Andrew, and I will see you next time.